The security guard's hands clamped around her shoulders just as the cardiac monitor shrieked its final warning. Nurse Mia Chen planted her feet, refusing to be dragged from the bedside of the unconscious man everyone else wanted gone. In the chaos of Mercy Heights Medical Center's ICU, no one heard it at first. The shrill ringing of an ancient red telephone mounted behind the nurse's station, a Cold War relic that hadn't made a sound in 43 years. The guards yanked harder. Mia's badge clattered to the floor, and then the hospital administrator's face went chalk white as he lifted the receiver and heard 4 words that would shatter everything. This is the Pentagon. Before we dive into what happened next, I want to invite you to stay with me until the very end of this story. If you're gripped by what unfolds, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The fluorescent lights of Mercy Heights Medical Center hummed their usual monotone symphony at 2:47 a.m., casting everything in that peculiar shade of sick green that made even healthy people look half dead. Mia Chen had worked the graveyard shift in the emergency department for 6 years, long enough to know the difference between a regular homeless patient and something else entirely. This was something else. She'd noticed him the moment the paramedics wheeled him through the automatic doors. Mid-50s, weathered face, clothes that reeked of the streets, but his hands told a different story. No grime under the nails. Calluses in specific patterns she'd seen before on military personnel. And when she'd helped transfer him to the gurney, she'd felt the distinct topology of old scar tissue beneath his filthy jacket, the kind you get from shrapnel, not street fights. Bed 7, the triage nurse had said without looking up. Probable alcohol intoxication, vitals stable enough. Get him fluids and a psych consult in the morning. But Mia had checked his pupils, equal and reactive, not the pinpoint constriction of opioid use or the blown-out dilation of stimulants. His breathing pattern was wrong too, controlled, measured, like someone fighting to stay unconscious rather than someone who'd passed out. She'd moved closer, adjusting his oxygen cannula when his eyes had cracked open for just a second. Blue eyes, sharp despite the obvious pain. His lips barely moved. Checkpoint, Delta, 9. Then he was gone again, but his right hand had twitched, fingers moving in a pattern. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, tap. Morse code. She'd learned it from her grandfather, a Navy veteran. Help. That's when Dr. Marcus Westfield arrived, coffee in hand and irritation carved into every line of his face. Westfield was the kind of doctor who'd gone into emergency medicine for the prestige, not the people. 38, expensive watch, hair that probably required more product than Mia's entire morning routine. What's the holdup on bed 7? He asked, not bothering with pleasantries. We've got actual patients coming in from a car accident. I need that bed cleared. Mia straightened. I think there's more going on here than intoxication. His presentation doesn't match. Did you run a BAC? It came back negative, but tox screen? Pending, but Dr. Westfield. His scars suggest military background, and he was trying to communicate. Westfield's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Communicate? He's a vagrant, Chen. They all have scars. They all have stories. What he needs is a bus voucher and a sandwich, not a bed in my ICU. He checked his watch, a Rolex that probably cost more than Mia's annual salary. Transfer him to the shelter observation unit, now. I really think we should... Are you refusing a direct order? Westfield's voice carried across the department, drawing glances from the other nurses. Because I'm happy to discuss your insubordination with administration. Mia felt heat rise in her chest, but she kept her voice level. I'm advocating for my patient. Something's not right. Give me 2 hours to work him up properly. 2 hours? Westfield stepped closer, lowering his voice to a condescending whisper. Let me guess. You're bored because we haven't had any real traumas tonight? Looking for a project? This isn't a teaching hospital, and you're not a detective. You're a nurse. Do your job. The patient's monitor beeped steadily between them. Mia glanced at the screen. Heart rate had dropped to 52. Not dangerously low, but lower than it had been. BP holding at 110/70. Oxygen saturation 94%. Nothing dramatic, but the trend was wrong. His vitals are declining, she said. They're stable. Westfield countered. You want to know what's actually wrong with him? He's sleeping off whatever he took before he passed out in that alley. We pump him full of expensive tests, waste resources, and in 6 hours he'll walk out and do it all again. He raised his voice deliberately. Sarah, prep bed 7 for transport to shelter obs, and somebody page social services. Sarah Kim, one of the newer nurses, hesitated. She looked at Mia, uncertainty flickering across her face. Don't look at her, Westfield snapped. I'm the attending physician. My orders supersede her instincts. Mia's jaw tightened. She'd seen this dance before. Doctors who treated nursing assessments like background noise, who forgot that nurses spent hours with patients while they swooped in for 5-minute evaluations. But something about this particular dismissal felt different, dangerous. She tried once more. Doctor, Westfield, I understand we need the bed, but this man has combat scars consistent with military service, and he attempted to communicate what might be a classified code phrase. I'm formally requesting... Westfield's eyebrows shot up. This isn't the UN, Chen. It's a county hospital at 3 in the morning. He pulled out his phone, typed something rapidly. You know what? I'm documenting this. Nurse exhibiting signs of fatigue-related paranoia. Seeing conspiracies in homeless patients? Maybe you need to go home. I'm not tired. You're relieved. Westfield's smile didn't reach his eyes. Consider it a kindness. I'm sure you're overworked. Take the rest of the shift off. Paid. We'll call it stress leave. The other nurses had stopped what they were doing. The ED had gone quiet except for the various monitors and the distant wail of an approaching ambulance. Mia didn't move. I'm not leaving my patient. He's not your patient anymore. Westfield turned to Sarah. Get him ready for transport. Now. Sarah wheeled a stretcher toward bed 7, her movements slow and reluctant. Mia intercepted her, placing a hand on the gurney's rail. Sarah, don't. The younger nurse's eyes widened. Mia, I can't. He's the doctor, and I'm the one who's been with this patient since he came in. Something is seriously wrong. We move him, and we might lose whatever window we have to figure out what. Westfield was already on his phone again. Jerry? Yeah, it's Dr. Westfield in the ED. I need security to bed 7. We have a staff member refusing orders. The words hung in the air like poison. In 6 years, Mia had never been called a problem. She'd pulled double shifts when they were understaffed, had talked suicidal patients down from ledges, had performed CPR until her arms screamed and then kept going. She'd been called dependable, dedicated, occasionally too stubborn, but never insubordinate. You're calling security on me? She couldn't quite believe it. I'm protecting my patient from a nurse who's clearly experiencing some kind of episode, Westfield said smoothly. For your own good, Mia. You'll thank me later. 2 security guards appeared within 90 seconds, Jerry Kowalski and Dennis Park, both of whom Mia had worked with during countless psych emergencies and violent patient situations. Jerry looked uncomfortable. Dennis wouldn't meet her eyes. Guys, Mia said quietly, you know me. You know I wouldn't make a scene without good reason. We do know you, Jerry said, and he sounded genuinely apologetic. But we have our orders too. Westfield crossed his arms. Escort Nurse Chen to the locker room. She's on administrative leave pending psychiatric evaluation. Psychiatric evaluation? Mia's voice rose despite herself. Are you serious right now? I'm absolutely serious. You're showing signs of paranoid ideation, refusing direct medical orders, creating a hostile work environment. I'm advocating for... You're having a breakdown. Westfield's tone shifted to something that might have been concern if it wasn't so obviously performative. And that's okay. The job gets to all of us eventually, but I can't have you putting patients at risk. The only person putting this patient at risk is you. The words came out harder than Mia intended, echoing across the ED. You won't listen, you won't look, you won't consider any possibility that doesn't fit your preconceived. That's enough. Westfield nodded to the guards. Remove her. If she resists, consider it a code gray. Code gray. Violent person in the facility. Mia's hands started shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer injustice of it. She looked around the ED at the nurses she'd worked beside for years. Some looked away. Others watched with something like horror. None spoke up. Please, she said, directing her words to everyone and no one. Please, someone just check him properly. Run a CT. Look at his scars. Listen to what I'm saying. Sarah Kim bit her lip, clearly torn. One of the other nurses, an older woman named Patricia, opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. Westfield pulled out his phone and started typing. For the record, I'm noting that Nurse Chen became increasingly agitated and confrontational when asked to follow standard protocol. She disrupted patient care and created an unsafe environment. This is insane, Mia breathed. No, Westfield said, meeting her eyes. This is medicine. This is hierarchy. This is how things work. Jerry's hand touched her elbow gently. Come on, Mia. Don't make this harder. She looked back at bed 7. The patient hadn't moved. His monitor continued its steady beeping, but that heart rate was definitely trending down now, 50 beats per minute. His oxygen saturation had dropped to 92%. His sats are falling, she said urgently. Someone needs to... We've got it, Westfield interrupted. Sarah, increase his oxygen to 4 liters. That'll handle it. But it wouldn't handle it. Mia knew it wouldn't handle it because the problem wasn't oxygenation. It was something deeper, something systemic that they were all missing because they'd already decided this man wasn't worth their attention. Dennis took her other arm. Both guards were careful not to hurt her, but their grip was firm. Don't do this, Mia pleaded, looking directly at Westfield now. I'm begging you. Something is seriously wrong with him. If you move him or ignore him, he could die. If he dies in shelter observation, it'll be from the same thing that kills dozens of homeless people every night in this city, complications from chronic addiction and poor life choices. Westfield's face was stone. Your shift is over, Nurse Chen. Go home. They started pulling her backward. Mia tried to plant her feet, but the guards were stronger and she wasn't going to actually fight them. That would just prove Westfield's point about her being unstable. Check his dog tags, she called out as they dragged her past the nurse's station. I felt them under his shirt. Check his ID. She's delusional, Westfield announced to the room. Someone note the time, 0256 hours. Nurse Mia Chen relieved of duty for psychiatric reasons. The world tilted into surreal territory. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to people who followed the rules, who showed up on time, who did their jobs well. But it was happening, and every second she spent being hauled away was another second that patient went without proper care. They were almost to the locker room hallway when the sound cut through everything else. A phone ringing. Not a cell phone or a regular landline, something older, shriller, a sound from another era. Everyone froze. The red telephone mounted on the wall behind the nurse's station, a relic from the 1970s that Mia had never heard ring in her entire tenure at Mercy Heights, was screaming into the silence of the ED. It wasn't the electronic chirp of modern phones. It was an actual mechanical bell, harsh and insistent. Jerry's grip loosened. Dennis actually let go of her arm entirely. Patricia moved toward the phone like she was approaching a bomb. Her hand shook as she lifted the receiver. Mercy Heights Emergency Department, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Everyone watched her face change. Color drained from her cheeks. Her eyes went wide. Yes, I understand. One moment, please. She lowered the phone, her hand covering the mouthpiece. When she spoke, her voice cracked. It's the Department of Defense. They're asking why a classified GPS beacon stopped transmitting from our facility 23 minutes ago. The monitors continued their symphony of beeps. Somewhere in the distance, that ambulance was getting closer. But in the ED itself, you could have heard a pin drop. Westfield's face went through several colors in rapid succession. That's impossible. It's a prank. Patricia held out the phone. They're asking for the attending physician and the hospital administrator. By name. They already know who you are. Mia felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at bed 7, at the patient everyone had wanted to throw away, and suddenly his cryptic words made terrible, perfect sense. Checkpoint Delta 9 wasn't a code phrase. It was a location identifier. Westfield took the phone with trembling hands. Whatever he heard made the color drain from his face entirely. He said, "Yes, sir," 3 times, followed by, "I understand, sir," twice, and then handed the phone back to Patricia like it had burned him. Call hospital administration, he said hoarsely. Get Director Hammond down here immediately. And get that patient to ICU. Full workup, cardiac monitoring, CT head and chest, full labs including coag panel and cardiac enzymes. The guards released Mia completely. Sarah Kim was already moving, but she paused. Dr. Westfield, you said to transfer him to... I don't care what I said 5 minutes ago. Westfield's voice cracked. Get him to ICU now. Move. Mia didn't wait for permission. She strode back to bed 7, her hands moving on autopilot, checking lines, adjusting monitors, doing the rapid assessment she should have been allowed to do from the beginning. The patient's heart rate had dropped to 48. Blood pressure was 98/62 now, dropping. I need atropine, Mia called out. He's bradying down. Sarah, get me a crash cart. Patricia, call ICU and tell them we're coming up hot. The ED exploded into controlled chaos. The same people who'd watched her get dragged away were now scrambling to help. Westfield stood frozen by the phone, his expensive coffee forgotten on the counter. Mia worked quickly, starting a second IV line, drawing blood, preparing emergency medications. The patient's eyes flickered open again briefly, those sharp blue eyes focusing on her face with something that looked almost like gratitude. Hang on, she whispered. Whoever you are, just hang on. His lips moved. She leaned closer. They followed. Then his eyes rolled back and the monitor started shrieking, heart rate plummeting into the 30s. He's crashing! Mia slammed the code blue button. I need that atropine now! Jerry, the security guard, appeared beside her with the medication, his earlier reluctance replaced by pure efficiency. Here, I've got the cart. What do you need? Bag him while I push this. Mia's hands were steady as she injected the atropine, watching the monitor. Come on, come on. The heart rate bumped to 42, 46, 51. The patient gasped, his back arching slightly. The monitor stabilized at 58 beats per minute. That's it, Mia breathed. Stay with us. Director Blake Hammond arrived in a whirlwind of pressed suit and barely concealed panic. He was a small man who'd built his career on budget management and political maneuvering. Medical emergencies were not his forte. The phone call from the Pentagon had clearly shattered his usual composure. What the hell is going on? He demanded. I just had a deputy secretary tell me we're housing a classified asset and that military personnel are en route. Does someone want to explain how we didn't know we had a classified asset? He presented as homeless, Westfield said weakly. We had no reason to... No reason to what? Check for ID? Run basic triage? Hammond's face was red. Where is he now? Transferring to ICU, Mia said, not looking away from her patient. And he needs to go now, not after we stand here debating how this happened. Hammond turned to her, seeming to notice her for the first time. You're the nurse who refused to transfer him? I'm the nurse who recognized that something was wrong, yes. She's the one who caused this whole situation, Westfield interjected. She refused orders, created a scene. She saved his life, Patricia interrupted quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. The older nurse rarely spoke up in conflicts, but her voice was firm now. I've been watching the telemetry. If we'd moved him to shelter observation like you ordered, Dr. Westfield, he'd have coded there with no monitoring, no equipment, and no staff who could have responded in time. She was right. You were wrong. The silence that followed was broken by a new sound, the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors in the distance. Hammond ran to the window. Oh my God, there are helicopters landing on our lawn. Not just helicopters. Mia could see them through the ED windows, 2 black military choppers setting down on the grass outside the main entrance, their rotors whipping up a whirlwind of debris. Men in tactical gear were already jumping out, weapons held in ready positions. Lock down the building, Hammond barked into his radio. Security, lock down all entrances except the main lobby. Nobody in or out without military clearance. The ED doors burst open. 6 soldiers in full combat gear swept through, weapons raised, moving with the kind of precision that suggested extensive training. The one in front, a woman with captain's bars, scanned the room with sharp eyes. Who's in charge? She demanded. Hammond stepped forward, trying to assert authority despite the tremor in his voice. I'm the hospital director. What's the meaning of... Where's Colonel Mercer? The captain cut him off. We tracked his beacon to this facility. I need eyes on him now. Colonel? Westfield's voice cracked on the word. The captain's gaze snapped to him. Where is he? Mia stepped forward. Transferring to ICU. He's stable, but we had to administer atropine for bradycardia. BP's holding but trending down. I can take you to him. The captain studied her for a moment. You're the nurse who wouldn't let them move him? How did you... We've been monitoring all communications in and out of this facility since his beacon stopped. We heard everything. The captain's expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but something close to approval. Good work. She turned to her team. Reyes, Santos, secure the ICU. Martinez, exterior perimeter. Nobody gets close to this building without clearance. She looked back at Mia. Take me to him, now. They moved through the hospital corridors at a near run. Mia led the way, the captain close behind, with 2 soldiers flanking them. The rest of the team had dispersed to secure the building. What happened to him? The captain asked as they entered the stairwell. The beacon went active 3 hours ago. Standard emergency protocol. Then it stopped transmitting 23 minutes ago. He came in unconscious, presented as a homeless patient. No ID we could find initially, but he had military scars, tried to communicate in what I think was code. The attending wanted to transfer him to shelter observation. Mia's anger bled into her voice despite her attempt to stay professional. I refused. They tried to fire me. The captain made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. Of course they did. Bet they're regretting that now. They burst through the ICU doors. The unit had been cleared. 6 regular patients hastily moved to other beds, leaving only the colonel in the secure room at the end. 2 soldiers were already stationed outside. The captain moved to the bedside with practiced efficiency, checking his pupils, his pulse, the monitors. She pulled out a secure radio. This is Havoc 6. I have eyes on package. He's stable but compromised. We need immediate medical evac to Walter Reed. ETA on the bird? A crackle of static. Havoc 6, this is Havoc 1. Bird is 15 minutes out. Be advised, we've got multiple vehicles approaching the facility from the east. Unknown hostiles. The captain's expression hardened. She turned to Mia. How many ways in and out of this ICU? 2 main exits, 1 emergency stairwell, and a service elevator. The service elevator, where does it go? Basement, main floor, and roof. Roof access from the elevator? Yes, but it's keycard restricted. The captain spoke into her radio again. All units, we've got a potential breach scenario. Lock down all elevator access. Nobody gets to the roof without my authorization. She looked at Mia. Stay with him. If anything changes on those monitors, you tell me immediately. What's happening? The people who put him in this condition are very interested in making sure he doesn't wake up. They followed his beacon here just like we did. The captain moved to the door, weapon ready. Which means this hospital just became a battlefield. Mia's mouth went dry. She looked at the colonel, this man she'd fought to protect without even knowing who he was, and realized she'd stumbled into something far bigger than a medical emergency. The lights in the ICU flickered once, then went completely dark. Emergency generators kicked in after 3 seconds, bathing everything in dim red emergency lighting. The monitors stayed active, running on battery backup, but the sudden darkness had transformed the familiar hospital into something alien and threatening. The captain's voice cut through the darkness, calm and controlled. All units, we've got a power failure. Assume hostile action. Weapons hot. Outside the ICU windows, Mia could see the entire hospital had gone dark. The city lights in the distance still glowed. This wasn't a grid failure. Someone had cut their power deliberately. The colonel's heart rate spiked on the monitor. 65, 70, 80 beats per minute. His eyes cracked open, and in the red emergency lighting, they locked onto Mia's face with sudden fierce clarity. They're here, he whispered. And somewhere in the darkness of the hospital below, glass shattered. The sound of shattering glass came from the emergency department, 3 floors below and half a building away. But in the sudden silence of the power failure, it rang out like a gunshot. The colonel's warning still hung in the air between them, his eyes now fully alert despite the medications flowing through his IV line. Captain Morrison, Mia had caught the name from her radio chatter, moved with liquid efficiency to the ICU window, staying to the side of the frame as she scanned the grounds below. Her hand signals brought the two soldiers from the hallway into the room, weapons raised and trained on the doorway. "Reyes, you've got the door. Santos, with me." Morrison pulled a compact tablet from her tactical vest, fingers flying across the screen. Building schematics downloaded. 3 potential breach points from ground level, plus roof access via that service elevator. Mia's hands moved automatically, checking the colonel's vital signs even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Blood pressure holding at 102/68. Heart rate elevated but stable at 78. Oxygen saturation 96%. The monitor's soft beeping felt absurdly normal against the backdrop of whatever was unfolding. "How many?" the colonel asked, his voice rough from intubation during the initial stabilization. He was trying to sit up, and Mia gently pressed him back down. "You need to stay still. Your cardiac rhythm just stabilized and—" "How many hostiles?" he repeated, looking past her to Morrison. The captain's expression was grim. "Thermal imaging from our perimeter team shows at least 8 signatures entering through the east wing. Professional movement patterns. They knew exactly where to cut the power." "Kozlov's people." The colonel's jaw tightened. "He sent a cleanup crew." Morrison nodded once, confirming something in that shorthand way soldiers had of communicating volumes with minimal words. She spoke into her radio. "Havoc 1. Package confirms hostile force is Kozlov affiliated. Treat as level 5 threat. Rules of engagement are weapons free." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Havoc 6. Medical evac is still 12 minutes out. We're holding position at the LZ." 12 minutes. Mia had worked enough traumas to know that 12 minutes was an eternity when someone was actively trying to kill you. She looked at the colonel, this man whose life she'd fought to save without knowing anything about him except that he needed help, and felt the weight of her decision settling over her shoulders. She'd made herself part of this story the moment she refused to let them transfer him. "The stairwell," Morrison said, studying her tablet. "It's the most direct route from the ED to the ICU. Santos, get eyes on that entrance. Anyone comes through that door who isn't us, you drop them." Santos moved without hesitation, taking position in the hallway where he'd have a clear line of sight to the stairwell access. Mia watched him go, watched the casual way he held his weapon like it was an extension of his body, and the reality of the situation crashed over her in a fresh wave. This wasn't a training scenario or a medical simulation. People were coming to kill the man in the bed beside her, and they were willing to go through anyone who got in their way. "Ma'am," Reyes spoke from his position by the door. "Shouldn't we evacuate the civilian?" Morrison glanced at Mia, assessment flickering across her features. "Can you move him without medical supervision?" "No." Mia's voice came out stronger than she felt. "He's on a cardiac monitor, 3 IV drips, including pressors to maintain his blood pressure, and his rhythm was unstable less than 15 minutes ago. Moving him right now could trigger another arrest." "Then she stays." Morrison made it sound simple, like Mia hadn't just committed herself to standing in the middle of a firefight. "You know how to use a weapon?" Mia shook her head. "Then stay behind the bed, keep low, and keep him alive. That's your only job." Morrison moved to the window again, her radio crackling with updates from her team scattered throughout the hospital. The colonel's hand found Mia's wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "You should go. Get out while you can." "I'm not leaving my patient." The words came automatically, the same response she'd given Westfield what felt like a lifetime ago. "Besides, they tried to fire me already. Might as well see this through." Despite everything, the colonel's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Stubborn. You have no idea." Glass shattered again, closer this time. Second floor, maybe third. The emergency lighting cast everything in shades of red and shadow, turning the familiar ICU into something from a nightmare. Mia could hear other sounds now too, shouting from somewhere in the building, footsteps running, the distant wail of police sirens approaching from outside. Morrison's radio erupted with chatter. "Havoc 6, this is Havoc 2. We've got visual on 4 hostiles entering through the south entrance. They're moving fast, coordinated assault pattern, heading for the central elevator bank." "Disable those elevators," Morrison ordered. "Force them to the stairs where we can control the choke points." "Already on it. Maintenance has been notified. Elevators 1 through 4 are locked down." "But ma'am, the service elevator is on independent power. If they have access cards..." They won't. Morrison looked at Mia. Who has access to that elevator? Administration, security, and department heads. The cards are individually coded and tracked. They'll have one. The colonel's voice was flat with certainty. Kozlov doesn't send people in blind. They'll have whatever access they need. As if to prove his point, a soft ding echoed from somewhere down the hallway, the distinctive sound of an elevator arriving. Morrison's hand signals brought Reyes into a tighter defensive position. Santos's voice came through the radio, barely a whisper. Service elevator just opened on this floor. I count 3 hostiles armed with suppressed weapons. They're moving toward the ICU. Mia's breath caught in her throat. She pressed herself against the wall behind the colonel's bed, her hands instinctively checking his IV lines, even though there was nothing medical she could do about armed men coming to kill them. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, oblivious to the approaching danger. "Light them up," Morrison said calmly into her radio. The sound of suppressed gunfire was nothing like the movies. No dramatic bangs or echoing reports. Just a series of rapid coughs, like someone clearing their throat repeatedly, followed by the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor. Mia flinched despite herself, her medical training warring with the reality that those were human beings dying in her hospital's hallway. 3 down, Santos reported. Checking for additional— Wait, I've got movement in the stairwell. Morrison was already moving, positioning herself where she could cover both the hallway entrance and maintain line of sight to the window. How many? At least 4 more. They're stacking up, preparing to breach. The colonel tried to sit up again, his face contorted with frustration. I need a weapon. I can help. You can help by staying alive, Mia told him firmly, adjusting his oxygen cannula. Your blood pressure is still borderline and your heart rate is climbing. You code right now and everything they're doing to protect you becomes meaningless. He looked like he wanted to argue, but the monitor chose that moment to alarm. Heart rate had spiked to 95. Mia silenced the alarm and drew up a small dose of beta blocker, pushing it into his IV while keeping one eye on the doorway. You're good at this, he said quietly, at keeping people alive. It's literally my job. But her hands were shaking now, adrenaline making her fingers tremble as she documented the medication in her mind, knowing the chart wouldn't matter if none of them survived the next few minutes. The stairwell door exploded inward with a crash that made Mia jump. Santos opened fire immediately, the muzzle flash from his weapon strobing in the red emergency lighting. Someone screamed, a sound of pain that cut through the tactical chaos. Return fire came in controlled bursts, rounds punching through drywall and sending up puffs of white powder. Reyes suppressing fire, Morrison barked. Both soldiers laid down a coordinated pattern that drove the attackers back into the stairwell. Havoc 1, we are engaged on ICU level. Multiple hostiles, professional-grade opposition. We need that evac bird now. Havoc 6, be advised medical evac is still 9 minutes out. Local PD is requesting permission to enter the building. Negative. This is a federal operation. Keep them outside the perimeter. Last thing we need is local cops walking into a hot zone. Mia crouched behind the colonel's bed, her back pressed against the cold tile wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. She could hear her own breathing, harsh and rapid in her ears, could feel the colonel's eyes on her even as she monitored his vitals by muscle memory alone. You're doing fine, he said, and there was something almost gentle in his rough voice. First time under fire is always the worst. This is insane. The words came out more sharply than she intended. 4 hours ago, I was worried about getting my charting done on time. Now there are people shooting at me in my own hospital. 4 hours ago, you saved my life by trusting your instincts when everyone told you to back down. The colonel's hand found hers again, steadying her shaking fingers. That took more courage than most people show their entire lives. Before Mia could respond, the lights came back on. Full fluorescent brightness that was momentarily blinding after the dim red emergency lighting. The sudden illumination revealed the damage to the hallway. Bullet holes stitching across walls, ceiling tiles hanging loose, dark stains on the floor that Mia's medical training immediately identified as blood. Morrison swore under her breath. They've got someone in the power systems. Reyes, Santos, be ready. They're going to use this to push. She was right. The moment of confusion as everyone's eyes adjusted was exactly when the attackers struck. 4 men in tactical gear burst from the stairwell in a coordinated rush, weapons up and firing. Santos took a round to his body armor that drove him backward into the wall. Reyes returned fire, dropping one attacker but taking a graze across his shoulder that left his sleeve dark with blood. Morrison moved like water, her weapon tracking and firing with mechanical precision. Two more attackers went down, but the fourth made it into the ICU proper, his weapon swinging toward the colonel's room. Mia saw him in the doorway, young, maybe 30, dark eyes cold and professional above his balaclava. He had his weapon raised, finger on the trigger, and time seemed to stretch into horrible slow motion as she realized there was nothing between that gun barrel and the colonel's chest. Then Morrison was there, tackling the man from the side, both of them crashing into a medication cart that exploded in a shower of supplies and pharmaceuticals. They grappled on the floor, too close for weapons, fighting with desperate intensity. The attacker was bigger, but Morrison was faster, getting her arm around his throat in a chokehold that cut off his air supply. He thrashed, tried to reverse the position, managed to throw her off for a moment. Mia saw the knife appear in his hand, a black tactical blade that caught the fluorescent light as he drove it toward Morrison's ribs. Without thinking, operating on pure instinct, Mia grabbed the nearest object, a metal IV pole, and swung it like a baseball bat. The pole connected with the attacker's arm with a solid crack that she felt all the way up to her shoulders. The knife clattered across the floor. Morrison used the distraction to reverse their positions, slamming the man's head against the tile floor once, twice, 3 times until he stopped moving. For a moment, neither woman moved. Morrison was breathing hard, blood from a split lip dripping onto her tactical vest. Mia still held the IV pole, her knuckles white around the metal, staring at the unconscious man on the floor and trying to process that she'd just attacked another human being. "Good hit," Morrison said, wiping blood from her mouth. She zip-tied the attacker's hands behind his back with efficient movements, then retrieved both his weapon and knife. "You might not know how to shoot, but you can definitely swing a pole." Mia's hands started shaking again, harder this time. The IV pole clattered as she set it down. Is he dead?" "Unconscious. He'll wake up with a headache and federal charges." Morrison checked her weapon, reloading with practiced efficiency. "Reyes? Santos? Status?" "Flesh wound," Reyes called from the hallway. "I'm good to continue." Santos appeared in the doorway, one hand pressed to his ribs where the round had hit his armor. Bruised, not broken, still in the fight. The radio crackled with an update that made Morrison's expression darken. "Havoc 6, this is Havoc 3. We've got a situation in the ED. 2 individuals matching staff credentials are attempting to access the elevators. One of them is the attending physician from earlier." Morrison looked at Mia. "The doctor who tried to transfer him?" "Westfield." Mia's stomach dropped. "He tried to get the patient moved. He was insistent about it, even when it made no medical sense." The colonel's voice was hard. "He's compromised. Kozlov owns him." "Havoc 3, detain both individuals. Use of force authorized." Morrison moved to the window, scanning the grounds below. "How deep does this go? How many people in this hospital are on Kozlov's payroll?" "I don't know." Mia felt sick. She'd worked alongside Westfield for 2 years, had trusted his medical judgment even when she disagreed with his bedside manner. The idea that he'd been actively trying to harm a patient, trying to get the colonel into an isolated area where he could be killed quietly, made her want to scream. But there was something off about how hard he pushed to move him. I thought it was just arrogance, but it was an execution order disguised as medical care. The colonel's face was pale, but his jaw was set. Classic Kozlov. Use the system against itself. Make the victim's death look natural or like hospital negligence. Morrison's radio came alive with multiple voices talking over each other. She held up a hand for silence, listening intently. When she spoke, her voice was ice. "Say again, Havoc 3. You're breaking up." "Havoc 6, we've detained the physician. He's demanding to speak to hospital administration. But the second individual, the one we thought was staff, just went for a weapon. We had to neutralize the threat." "Casualties?" "1 hostile down. No friendly casualties." "But ma'am, we searched him. He's carrying credentials for hospital security, but his gear is professional grade. Radio encryption, tactical knife, and a suppressed Glock that definitely didn't come from any security office." Kozlov's people have infiltrated the entire facility. Morrison's expression was grim. They've been planning this since the colonel's beacon went active. Planted people in the hospital, compromised staff, cut power to create confusion. She looked at the colonel. What were you carrying? What's worth this much effort to kill you and everyone around you? The colonel's hand moved to his chest, fingers touching the bandages where Mia had cleaned and dressed his wounds hours earlier. It's not what I'm carrying, it's what I know. Project Nightfall. Kozlov's entire network, names, locations, bank accounts, everything. I was 3 days from testifying when they tried to eliminate me. And you didn't think to mention this earlier? Morrison's voice rose slightly. I was told this was a standard extraction. Need to know basis. You didn't need to know until now. The colonel's face was tight with pain. The data's encrypted and uploaded to secure servers. Kozlov can't get to it. But if I'm dead, I can't testify. Without my testimony, the encryption keys die with me, and everything I gathered becomes useless. Mia adjusted his morphine drip, watching the pain lines around his eyes ease slightly. So they're not just trying to kill you, they're trying to silence you. Same difference in my line of work. Morrison was already on her radio, relaying this new information up the chain of command. The response came back in seconds. Havoc 6, be advised. Situation has been elevated to national security priority. You are authorized to use any means necessary to keep package alive until extraction. Additional support is being scrambled from Fort Bragg, ETA 22 minutes. 22 minutes is too long, the colonel said. Kozlov's people will throw everything at this position before then. They know they're running out of time. As if summoned by his words, the building's fire alarm began to wail, a piercing electronic shriek that overrode every other sound. Mia's head snapped up, her mind automatically cataloging the implications. Fire alarm meant automatic door releases, sprinkler activation, and mandatory evacuation protocols. It's not a fire, Morrison said grimly. They're trying to force evacuation, get everyone running, create chaos, and hit us in the confusion. Santos appeared in the doorway again, his face streaked with sweat and drywall dust. Ma'am, we've got a problem. Building security is responding to the fire alarm. They're ordering everyone to evacuate immediately, and they don't have clearance to know this is a federal operation. Get on the PA system. Tell them it's a false alarm. Morrison was thinking on her feet, adapting to each new development with the kind of flexibility that suggested extensive field experience. Better yet, tell them there's a gas leak in the south wing. That'll keep civilians away from our position. Already done, but hospital administration is pushing back. They're threatening to override us. Morrison's expression turned dangerous. Get Director Hammond on the line. Tell him if he interferes with this operation, he'll be facing federal obstruction charges. And someone shut off that damn alarm before I shoot the speaker myself. The alarm cut off mid-wail, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Mia's ears felt stuffed with cotton, the sudden quiet almost worse than the noise. She checked the colonel's vitals again, blood pressure dropping slightly, 98/64, heart rate climbing, 88. The stress was taking its toll on his already compromised system. I need to increase his pressors, she said, adjusting the IV pump. His pressure's falling. Morrison nodded without looking away from the hallway. Do what you need to do. What Mia needed was a fully staffed ICU with backup physicians and a pharmacy that wasn't currently in a building under siege, but she made do with what she had. Drew up another dose of norepinephrine, pushed it carefully, watched the numbers start to climb back toward acceptable ranges. The colonel's hand caught hers as she withdrew the syringe. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this. No, I mean it. You didn't know who I was. Didn't know if I was worth the fight. But you fought anyway. Mia met his eyes, saw the genuine gratitude there beneath the pain and exhaustion. I saw a patient who needed help. That's all I needed to know. Most people would have walked away. Most people aren't nurses. She managed a tight smile. We're too stubborn to know when we're beaten. Morrison's radio interrupted the moment. Havoc 6, be advised. We've got multiple vehicles approaching the facility at high speed. Count 6 SUVs, heavily armed occupants. This is a full assault. The captain's response was instant. All units, prepare for coordinated attack. Lock down all entry points. Rules of engagement are weapons free. Anyone who's not us is hostile. She looked at Mia and the colonel. This is it. They're making their final push before our reinforcements arrive. Mia felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the ICU window, she could see the approaching headlights. 6 vehicles, indeed, moving with the kind of precision that suggested military training. They split into pairs, covering all 3 main entrances to the hospital. "How many people do you have?" the colonel asked Morrison. 6 operators, myself included, against what looks like 20-plus hostiles. Morrison's face was stone. "We've faced worse odds." "That's not reassuring." "It wasn't meant to be, I'm being honest." She checked her weapon again, her movements economical and practiced. "Our advantage is position and training. They have to come to us, and we know this terrain better than they do." The first explosion ripped through the south entrance, a controlled breach charge that turned the locked doors into twisted metal and shattered glass. Mia flinched at the sound, her hands instinctively covering the colonel's chest as if she could shield him from the blast 3 floors below. Morrison's radio erupted with coordinated reports from her team. "South entrance breached, 8 hostiles entering. North entrance, breach in progress. East wing, 4 hostiles moving through the ED." "They're hitting us from 3 directions at once," Morrison said, "trying to divide our forces and find the weak point." "What do we do?" Mia hated how her voice shook, but she couldn't help it. She'd trained for medical emergencies, not military assaults. "We hold this position, no matter what." Morrison moved to the doorway, Reyes and Santos flanking her. "They want him dead. They'll have to go through us to get him." The sounds of gunfire echoed up from the floors below. No longer suppressed, but full-throated automatic weapons fire that rattled windows and set off car alarms in the parking lot outside. Mia could hear screaming too, staff and patients caught in the crossfire, and her medical training screamed at her to help them, even as logic told her she'd be killed the moment she left this room. "Hospital security is engaging the hostiles in the south corridor," Morrison's radio reported. "They're outgunned and taking casualties. Request permission to support." "Negative," Morrison said, and Mia could hear the strain in her voice, the weight of choosing military objectives over civilian lives. "Your orders are to protect package. Security will have to hold on their own." The guilt in that decision hung heavy in the air. Mia thought of Jerry and Dennis, the security guards who'd reluctantly escorted her away earlier, and wondered if they were among those fighting and dying in the corridors below. People she knew, people she'd worked alongside for years, caught in a war they hadn't signed up for. The elevator dinged again, the service elevator arriving on their floor. Morrison spun toward the sound, weapon raised. "They've got another access card. Santos covering fire on that elevator." But the doors slid open to reveal not armed attackers, but Director Hammond and Dr. Westfield, both with their hands raised, and 2 of Morrison's soldiers behind them, weapons trained on their backs. "Ma'am," one of the soldiers said, "found them trying to access the service elevator from the 2nd floor. The doctor had this." He held up a high-end radio, military grade. He was in active communication with the assault team. Westfield's face had gone the color of old paper. "This is a misunderstanding. I was trying to coordinate with security. Save it." Morrison gestured for them to be brought into the room where she could keep an eye on them. "On your knees, hands behind your head, both of you." Hammond complied immediately, his expensive suit rumpling as he dropped to his knees. Westfield hesitated, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. The soldier behind him encouraged cooperation with the muzzle of his weapon pressed between Westfield's shoulder blades. "I want my lawyer," Westfield said. "I'm not saying anything without—" "You're under military detention during a federal operation," Morrison cut him off. "You don't get a lawyer until we're done here. Now shut up and stay down." Mia stared at Westfield, trying to reconcile this frightened, trapped man with the arrogant physician who'd dismissed her concerns hours earlier. "How much did they pay you? To kill him?" Westfield's eyes met hers, and she saw something ugly there, a mixture of resentment and fear. "You don't understand. Kozlov doesn't give you a choice. He finds your weakness and exploits it. My daughter's medical bills. I couldn't afford the experimental treatment she needed. He offered to pay for everything. All I had to do was flag certain patients in the system." "Flag them for murder." The colonel's voice was cold. "How many others? How many people died because you sold their information?" I didn't know. I just provided names and treatment schedules. What happened after that wasn't my responsibility. You knew enough. Morrison's contempt was palpable. You knew what you were doing was wrong, and you did it anyway. For money. Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time, maybe second floor. The windows rattled in their frames and ceiling tiles rained down in the hallway. Morrison's radio was chaos now. Multiple voices shouting over each other about hostiles breaching inner perimeters, about security forces falling back, about casualties mounting. Havoc 6, they're pushing hard on all fronts. We can't hold all three positions. Morrison made the call without hesitation. Fall back to defensive positions around the ICU. Create a choke point at the main stairwell. Anyone comes through, you light them up. What about the civilians? Direct them to the north stairwell and get them out of the building. But our priority is package. Everything else is secondary. Mia could see the calculation in Morrison's eyes, lives weighed against mission objectives, civilian safety balanced against national security. It was the kind of math Mia had never wanted to do. The kind that had no right answers, only less wrong ones. The colonel's monitor alarmed again, blood pressure dropping despite the increased pressors. Ju shi erfen ji wu shiba. Heart rate irregular, jumping between 70 and 90 beats per minute. His face had gone pale and sweaty, stress cardiomyopathy, triggered by the sustained adrenaline response. I need to get him stabilized, Mia said urgently. His heart can't take much more of this. Then work fast. Morrison positioned herself where she could cover both the door and watch their prisoners. Because they're coming and we're running out of time. Mia worked with shaking hands, adjusting drips and medications, watching numbers climb and fall on monitors that suddenly seemed inadequate for the task of keeping this man alive. She could hear the fighting getting closer, gunfire in the stairwell now, grenade explosions that shook dust from the ceiling. Hammond spoke from his position on the floor, his voice cracking. Please, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know Westfield was compromised. When you called about the Pentagon inquiry, I thought there was some mistake. You thought there was a mistake, so you came running to help cover it up. Morrison didn't look at him. That makes you complicit. I was trying to protect the hospital. You were trying to protect your budget and your reputation. There's a difference. The window behind Morrison exploded inward in a shower of glass as something metal and cylindrical tumbled through the opening. Mia had exactly 1 second to recognize it as a flashbang grenade before Morrison was shouting and throwing herself toward it, scooping it up and throwing it back out the window with movements so fast they barely registered. The explosion came from outside instead of in, a blinding flash and concussive boom that made Mia's ears ring even through the walls. Morrison was already back in position, weapon trained on the window, as 3 ropes dropped past the opening. They're coming up the exterior! Morrison barked into her radio. Rappelling team on the east face, heading for the ICU windows. Reyes appeared in the doorway, his shoulder wound wrapped in hasty bandages. I've got the window. You hold the door. The first attacker came through the window fast, rolling as he hit the floor and coming up with his weapon raised. Reyes shot him twice in center mass before he could aim. The second attacker was smarter, using the first as cover and returning fire that forced Reyes to duck behind a medical cart. Morrison engaged from her angle, her shots forcing the second attacker back toward the window. But the third was already coming through, and the fourth, a coordinated assault that threatened to overwhelm their position through sheer numbers. Mia kept her body between the attackers and the colonel, her hands still working on his IV lines, even as bullets punched through drywall above her head. This was insanity. This was beyond anything her nursing training had prepared her for. But the monitors were alarming, and the colonel's pressure was dropping, and she'd be damned if she let him die after everything they'd survived. Pressure's critical, she shouted over the gunfire. I need to push more pressors, but I'm at maximum safe dose. Then push unsafe doses. Morrison shot another attacker, her weapon clicking empty. She ejected the magazine and reloaded without taking her eyes off the window. Keep him alive, that's all that matters. Mia drew up a dose of medication that would get her license revoked under normal circumstances, pushed it into the IV, and watched the numbers climb. 96/60. 100/62. 104/66. The colonel's eyes focused on her face, lips moving in words she couldn't hear over the chaos. Hang on, she told herself. Just hang on. Santos's voice came through Morrison's radio, urgent and strained. Havoc 6, we've got a major problem. Building surveillance just picked up a vehicle approaching with what looks like a mounted weapon on the roof. They're going to try to shoot their way through the exterior wall. Morrison swore viciously. How long until the medical evac arrives? 3 minutes. Tell them to come in hot and be ready for hostile fire. This LZ is compromised. The sound of the approaching vehicle was audible even over the gunfire, a diesel engine roaring as it accelerated across the parking lot. Mia risked a glance out the window and saw it. A black SUV with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, the gunner already training it toward the ICU. "Everyone down!" Morrison shouted. The machine gun opened up with a sound like the world ending, a sustained roar of automatic fire that chewed through brick and concrete and turned the exterior wall into Swiss cheese. Mia threw herself across the colonel's bed, covering him with her own body as bullets screamed overhead and debris rained down around them. The monitors went crazy, alarms shrieking as power cables were severed and battery backups kicked in. The colonel's hand gripped Mia's arm with desperate strength, holding her in place as the walls disintegrated around them. Then the machine gun fire stopped, replaced by a different sound, the deep thump of helicopter rotors and the shriek of air-to-ground missiles. The explosion that followed rattled teeth and blew out every remaining window in the ICU. Mia's ears popped from the pressure wave, leaving her temporarily deaf except for a high-pitched ringing. When she could hear again, Morrison was on her radio, shouting, "Havoc 1, confirm. Did you just engage a hostile vehicle?" "Confirmed, Havoc 6. Target neutralized. LZ is clear for medical evac. We're coming in now." The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, and through the shattered windows Mia could see it descending, a Black Hawk with medical markings, its side doors open and personnel already preparing to receive casualties. It touched down on the lawn outside, exactly where the SUV had been moments before. Nothing remained of the vehicle but burning wreckage. "That's our ride!" Morrison grabbed the colonel's bed, releasing the brake locks. "Reyes, Santos, provide covering fire. We're moving now." The journey from the ICU to the helicopter was 40 yards that felt like 40 miles. Mia ran alongside the gurney, one hand maintaining pressure on the colonel's IV sights, the other steadying his oxygen line. Bullets still zipped past them, die-hard attackers taking last desperate shots from inside the building. Morrison and her team returned fire without breaking stride, their movements practiced and efficient. They hit the helicopter at a full run, strong hands reaching out to pull the gurney aboard. Mia scrambled in after it, her shoes slipping on blood-slick metal. "Go!" Morrison shouted to the pilot. "Get us out of here!" The helicopter lifted off with a surge that pressed Mia against the deck. Through the open doors, she could see Mercy Heights Medical Center falling away below them. Windows shattered, walls pockmarked with bullet holes, smoke rising from multiple fires. Emergency vehicles surrounded the building, their lights painting everything in strobing red and blue. A flight medic was already working on the colonel, connecting him to the helicopter's more advanced monitoring systems. BP's critical, pupils still reactive, multiple contusions consistent with assault. What's his medication history for the last 12 hours? Mia rattled off everything she'd given him, her voice mechanical with exhaustion. The medic's eyebrows rose slightly at the dosages, but he didn't question her judgment, just adjusted his own interventions accordingly. Morrison collapsed against the bulkhead beside Mia, her tactical vest scorched and torn, blood from a cut above her eye trickling down her face. She looked utterly spent, but when she met Mia's eyes, there was something fierce and satisfied in her expression. "You did good back there. Real good." Mia looked down at her hands, saw they were shaking again, covered in blood that might have been hers or the colonel's or someone else's entirely. She'd swung a metal pole at a man's head. She'd pushed medications at doses that could kill. She'd covered a patient with her own body while bullets destroyed the room around them. "I don't feel good," she admitted. "I feel terrified and sick, and like I'm going to pass out." "That's normal. That's what courage feels like." Morrison pulled out her radio, checking in with her scattered team members. "Havoc units, sound off!" One by one, her people reported in, all alive, all accounted for, though several were wounded. The building was being secured by federal agents who'd arrived in the aftermath of the assault. Local PD was processing the scene, and the media was already descending like locusts, helicopters circling at a safe distance to film the carnage. The flight medic looked up from his work. He's stable enough for transport, but we need to get him into surgery as soon as we land. There's internal bleeding we couldn't detect in the field. How long? Morrison asked. 10 minutes to Walter Reed. Trauma team is standing by. 10 minutes. Mia closed her eyes, felt the vibration of the helicopter through the deck, let herself believe for the first time that they might actually survive this. The colonel was still alive. She was still alive. Against impossible odds and overwhelming force, they'd held long enough for rescue to arrive. Morrison's radio crackled with a new voice, deeper, carrying the weight of authority. Havoc 6, this is Director Chen. We've taken 12 individuals into custody at the hospital, including the compromised physician. Early interrogation suggests the network runs deeper than we thought. How's our witness? Alive and en route to medical care, sir. Thanks to the nurse who refused to let them take him. There was a pause on the other end. The same nurse the doctor tried to fire? The same. I want a full debrief when you land, Captain, and get that nurse's name. Someone's going to want to thank her properly. Morrison looked at Mia, something almost like amusement flickering across her exhausted features. What's your full name? Mia Chen, registered nurse, emergency department, Mercy Heights Medical Center. She paused, then added bitterly, though I'm probably fired after tonight. I doubt that very much. Morrison's smile was real this time, tired but genuine. You just helped protect a federal witness and exposed a major security breach. You're a national hero. I don't feel like a hero. I feel like someone who got very lucky. Heroes usually do. Morrison closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the bulkhead. Lucky and brave aren't mutually exclusive. The helicopter banked left, beginning its descent toward Walter Reed. Through the windows, Mia could see the hospital's trauma center, lights blazing, personnel waiting on the landing pad with gurneys and equipment, a whole team ready to take over where she'd left off, with resources and expertise she could only dream of. The flight medic caught her eye, gestured to the colonel's monitors. You did excellent work stabilizing him under fire. How long have you been a combat medic? I'm not. I'm just a nurse. Just a nurse who kept a critical patient alive through an armed assault, under conditions that would make most medical personnel freeze up. He shook his head. That's not just anything. They touched down with a gentle bump, and suddenly the helicopter was full of people, trauma surgeons in scrubs, anesthesiologists, nurses with portable monitors and medication carts. They moved with coordinated efficiency, transferring the colonel to their gurney and whisking him toward the building at a run. Mia started to follow, but Morrison's hand on her shoulder stopped her. Let them take it from here. You've done your part. But I should give them report, tell them his history. They've got his full medical file transmitted from our systems, everything you documented in the field. Morrison guided her gently but firmly toward a waiting area. Right now, you need to sit down before you fall down. Mia wanted to argue, but her legs chose that moment to turn to water. She sat heavily in a chair, her whole body starting to shake with delayed shock. Morrison wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. When had she grabbed a blanket? And pressed a bottle of water into her hands. Drink, slowly. The water was cold and perfect, and Mia hadn't realized how thirsty she was until it hit her tongue. She drank half the bottle in desperate gulps, then forced herself to slow down. Around them, Walter Reed was a controlled chaos of activity. Federal agents in suits were arriving, setting up security perimeters. Morrison's team was being triaged for their own injuries, none serious, but all needing attention. And somewhere in the building, a trauma team was fighting to save the man Mia had refused to abandon. A woman in a dark suit approached, FBI credentials hanging around her neck. Nurse Chen. I'm Special Agent Rodriguez. I'll need to get a statement from you about tonight's events. Right now? Mia's voice cracked. Can it wait until... Actually, it can wait. A new voice, male and commanding. A man in an army uniform with stars on his shoulders, a general, Mia's scrambled brain supplied, strode toward them with Morrison snapping to attention. This woman just spent the last 3 hours keeping one of our most valuable assets alive under sustained enemy fire. She can give her statement after she's had medical attention, rest, and a chance to process what she's been through. Rodriguez looked like she wanted to argue, but the general's expression made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. She nodded curtly and withdrew. The general turned to Mia, his stern face softening slightly. "Mia Chen?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'm General Marcus Hawthorne. I oversee the unit Colonel Mercer works for." He pulled up a chair, sat down so they were at eye level. "Captain Morrison tells me you saved his life multiple times tonight, that you refused orders to abandon him, stood up to your supervisors, and ultimately held your position against a coordinated assault by trained killers." "I just did my job, sir." "Your job was to be a nurse. You went considerably beyond that." Hawthorne's voice was grave but not unkind. "You showed the kind of courage and integrity that we try to instill in our soldiers. You protected someone who couldn't protect themselves, at significant personal risk, because it was the right thing to do." Tears were running down Mia's face now, though she couldn't have said exactly why. Relief, maybe. Or delayed terror. Or the simple human need to have someone acknowledge that what she'd been through was real and significant and not just part of a regular night shift. "Is he going to be okay?" she managed to ask. "The trauma team is excellent. They'll do everything possible." Hawthorne stood, his hand briefly squeezing her shoulder. "But regardless of the outcome, you gave him the best possible chance. Without you, he'd have died in that hospital before we ever knew he was there." Morrison helped Mia to her feet. "Come on, let's get you checked out by medical, then somewhere you can rest." But before they could move, a commotion at the trauma center entrance made everyone turn. Two men in expensive suits were striding toward them, faces tight with barely controlled fury. Mia recognized one of them instantly, Marcus Westfield's attorney, whom she'd seen around Mercy Heights on several occasions. "Where's my client?" the attorney demanded. "You're holding him without charges, without—" "Your client is being held under the Patriot Act for conspiracy to commit murder, providing material support to a terrorist organization, and about 15 other federal charges that carry life sentences." Agent Rodriguez had reappeared, her smile sharp and humorless. "He'll be arraigned within 48 hours, at which point you can argue all you want about due process. Until then, he stays in federal custody." The attorney sputtered, but Rodriguez had already turned away, dismissing him. Mia felt a fierce satisfaction watching it happen, watching the system finally hold Westfield accountable for what he'd done. How many patients had suffered because of his greed? How many lives had been sold to Kozlov's network? She'd probably never know the full extent of it, but at least one life had been saved, and one conspiracy had been exposed, and sometimes that was the best you could hope for. A young nurse appeared, leading Mia toward the medical evaluation area. As they walked, Mia caught a glimpse through a window into the trauma bay. The colonel was surrounded by medical personnel, their movements coordinated and precise. She watched them work, professional recognition stirring despite her exhaustion. They were good. They'd save him if anyone could. And suddenly, watching them fight for his life the same way she'd fought for it in that bullet-riddled ICU, Mia felt something shift inside her. The fear and shock were still there, would probably be there for a long time, but underneath it was something else. Pride. She'd stood her ground when everyone told her she was wrong. She'd fought for her patient when the system tried to throw him away. And when armed killers came to finish the job, she hadn't run. She'd stayed and done everything in her power to keep him alive. That was what nursing meant, at its core. Not just the technical skills or the medical knowledge, but the absolute refusal to give up on the people who needed you most. The evaluation room was quiet and blessedly normal, just standard medical equipment and bright lights, and a physician's assistant who smiled kindly as she checked Mia's vitals and looked for injuries. Minor cuts from flying glass, bruised ribs from being slammed into walls, a strained shoulder from swinging that IV pole. Nothing serious. Nothing that wouldn't heal. But as the PA cleaned and bandaged her wounds, Mia's phone, somehow still in her pocket and somehow still functional, began to buzz with notifications. Text messages from other nurses at Mercy Heights, calls from friends who'd seen the news, voicemails from reporters already trying to get her story. She turned the phone off without listening to any of it. Whatever was waiting for her in the outside world, media attention, hospital administration's response, the aftermath of tonight's violence, it could wait until tomorrow. Right now, she was exactly where she needed to be, getting exactly the care she needed and allowing herself to finally stop running on adrenaline alone. Morrison appeared in the doorway as the PA was finishing up. General Hawthorne arranged quarters for you here on base. Private room, secure, no reporters. You can stay as long as you need. What about my apartment? My things? Being collected by federal agents as we speak. Don't worry, they'll be respectful, but your home address is already circulating online, and we'd rather keep you somewhere safe until the immediate media frenzy dies down. Morrison's expression was sympathetic. Your life is about to get very complicated, very quickly. Might as well enjoy the quiet while you can. Mia nodded, too tired to argue. The PA helped her into a wheelchair despite her protest that she could walk, and an orderly pushed her through the hospital corridors to a small but comfortable room that looked more like a hotel than military quarters. Morrison waited while she got settled, then paused in the doorway. For what it's worth, you're probably the toughest person I've worked with this year, and I've worked with special forces operators who parachute into war zones for breakfast. I didn't feel tough. I felt terrified the whole time. That's what makes it courage. Doing it anyway, despite the fear. Morrison smiled, and for the first time Mia saw the woman behind the soldier, someone probably not much older than herself, who'd chosen a hard path and walked it with honor. Get some rest. Someone will check on you in a few hours. Alone finally, Mia collapsed onto the bed without even removing her shoes. Her clothes were stiff with dried blood and sweat. Her hair was a disaster, and she probably smelled like gunpowder and fear. She should shower. She should change into the clean clothes someone had thoughtfully left on the dresser. She should do 100 different things. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the exhaustion drag her down into darkness. Her last conscious thought was a prayer, not to any god or higher power, but to the trauma team working on the colonel somewhere in this building. Save him, please save him. We've come too far to lose him now. The dreams came in fragments, gunfire and monitor alarms, and the colonel's blue eyes locked on hers while blood pooled on white tile. Mia jerked awake gasping, her hands already reaching for IV lines that weren't there, checking vital signs on a patient who existed only in her fractured sleep. The room was dark except for a thin strip of light under the door. Her phone, she'd turned it back on at some point without remembering, showed 6:47 a.m. She'd slept less than 4 hours, but her body was done with rest, flooded with cortisol and adrenaline that made lying still feel impossible. She showered in the tiny bathroom, watching rusty water circle the drain as dried blood washed from her hair and skin. The cuts on her hands stung under the hot spray. Her ribs ached with every breath. But the physical pain was almost welcome, concrete and manageable, unlike the chaotic swirl of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her every time she stopped moving. Clean clothes had appeared while she slept, not the ones Morrison mentioned, but proper attire in her exact size. Black slacks, a simple gray blouse, even undergarments still in packaging. Someone had been thorough. The efficiency was both comforting and unsettling. When she emerged, a young soldier was waiting in the hallway, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. He couldn't have been more than 22, with the kind of earnest face that made Mia think of her younger brother. "Ma'am, I'm Private Chen. No relation, just coincidence. I've been assigned as your escort." He smiled nervously. "General Hawthorne requests your presence at the morning briefing, if you're feeling up to it." It wasn't really a request. Mia understood military courtesy well enough to recognize a politely worded order. "Lead the way." They walked through corridors that hummed with pre-dawn activity. Walter Reed never truly slept. Trauma cases arrived at all hours, surgeries ran around the clock, and the business of keeping soldiers alive operated on no particular schedule. But there was an intensity to this morning's atmosphere that felt different from standard hospital efficiency. Private Chen led her to a conference room where a dozen people were already gathered around a long table covered in laptops and file folders. General Hawthorne stood at the head, studying a wall-mounted screen displaying what looked like organizational charts with photographs and connecting lines. Captain Morrison sat to his right, her face freshly bandaged where shrapnel had grazed her cheekbone. "Nurse Chen." Hawthorne gestured to an empty chair. "Thank you for joining us. I know you've had minimal rest." "How is he, the colonel?" The question burst out before Mia could stop it. "Stable. He came through surgery well. They had to repair a lacerated spleen and remove 2 bone fragments from his ribs, but the prognosis is good." Hawthorne's expression softened marginally. He's been asking for you, actually. Wants to thank you properly once he's conscious enough for visitors. Relief hit Mia so hard she had to grip the edge of the table. He'd made it. After everything, he'd actually made it. However, Hawthorne continued, his tone shifting back to business, we have a significant problem. The assault on Mercy Heights wasn't just about eliminating one witness. It was a message, and the message worked. He pressed a button and the screen changed to show news footage. Mercy Heights Medical Center cordoned off with police tape, shattered windows, burn marks on the exterior walls. The banner at the bottom read, Terrorist attack on local hospital. 12 dead, 34 injured. Mia's stomach dropped. 12 dead. She'd known there were casualties, had heard the gunfire, seen security guards fall. But seeing the number made it real in a way that hollowed out her chest. Hospital security personnel, nursing staff, one visitor who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hawthorne's voice was flat, reciting facts to keep emotion at bay. Kozlov wanted everyone to see what happens when you interfere with his operations. He wanted spectacle and terror, and he got both. He also got exposed, Morrison added. We took 12 of his operatives alive. 3 are already talking in exchange for reduced sentences. The intelligence we're gathering is unprecedented. Which brings us to you. Hawthorne turned his full attention to Mia. You're a critical witness to everything that happened. You can testify to Dr. Westfield's suspicious behavior, to the timeline of events, to the assault itself. The prosecution is going to need your testimony to build their case. Of course. Whatever you need. Mia's hands were shaking again. She pressed them flat against the table to hide it. There's more. An older woman in an FBI windbreaker spoke up from the far end of the table. She had steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. I'm Deputy Director Walsh, FBI. We've been investigating Kozlov's network for 3 years, and what we've uncovered in the last 12 hours has blown the case wide open. Dr. Westfield wasn't just selling patient information. He was part of a larger network of compromised medical professionals across 15 states. The screen changed again, showing a web of connections that made Mia dizzy. Doctors, nurses, administrators, all with red lines connecting them to a central node labeled Kozlov Network. They were targeting high-value individuals seeking medical care, Walsh continued. Politicians, witnesses in federal cases, business people who knew too much. The hospitals became hunting grounds. Most of the kills were made to look natural. Medication errors, post-surgical complications, infections that spiraled out of control. Mia felt bile rise in her throat. How many people died? We're still determining that. Dozens at minimum. Possibly more than 100 over the past 5 years. Walsh's expression was grim. Westfield's testimony could help us identify other compromised personnel, but he's refusing to cooperate without a deal. What kind of deal? Mia heard the edge in her own voice. Reduced sentence, witness protection, immunity for his daughter. Walsh's mouth twisted with distaste. He's claiming he was coerced, that Kozlov threatened his family. His attorneys are arguing duress. That's garbage. The words came out harder than Mia intended. I watched him push to move that patient. He wasn't scared or coerced. He was impatient. He wanted it done quickly so he could get back to his coffee and his ego. Your testimony will be crucial in establishing his state of mind and intent, Walsh said, but I need you to understand what you're signing up for. Testifying against Kozlov's network means making yourself a target. These people don't forgive, and they don't forget. Morrison leaned forward. We can provide protection, safe housing, new identity if necessary. No. Mia surprised herself with the firmness of her response. I'm not running. I'm not hiding. I did my job, and I'm not going to act like I did something wrong. Hawthorne studied her with those sharp general's eyes that probably saw through every pretense and defense. Admirable sentiment. Potentially fatal decision. Then give me protection without making me disappear. I have a life, a career, people who depend on me. Mia met his gaze without flinching. I'll testify. I'll help any way I can, but I won't let them erase who I am. A long silence followed. Morrison and Hawthorne exchanged a look that communicated something Mia couldn't quite parse. Walsh tapped her pen against her notepad, considering. There may be a middle ground, Walsh said finally. We've been considering offering you a position as a federal medical consultant. You'd work with our investigative teams, helping identify suspicious medical deaths that might be connected to Kozlov's network. It would give you legitimate reason to have protective details assigned, federal resources, and legal cover. You want me to hunt for more cases like this? Mia's mind reeled. I'm a trauma nurse, not an investigator. You're a trauma nurse who recognized a pattern everyone else missed, who trusted her instincts over authority, and who stood her ground when it would have been easier to walk away. Hawthorne's voice carried weight. That's exactly the kind of person we need. Before Mia could respond, the conference room door burst open. A young analyst in civilian clothes rushed in, tablet in hand, face flushed with urgency. Sir, we have a situation. Mercy Heights Medical Center's board of directors just held an emergency press conference. She pulled up a video feed on the main screen. The image showed 5 people in expensive suits seated behind a table heavy with microphones. Mia recognized the board chairman, Harold Vance, a real estate developer who treated the hospital more like a tax write-off than a healthcare facility. We want to assure the public that Mercy Heights takes security seriously, Vance was saying, his voice smooth with practiced sincerity. Last night's tragic events were the result of a disturbed employee who brought her personal problems into the workplace. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators and have implemented new screening protocols to prevent such incidents in the future. Mia's blood went cold. Disturbed employee? Are they talking about me? The video continued. Another board member, Patricia Thornton, who'd been trying to cut nursing staff for years, leaned toward her microphone. Nurse Chen exhibited concerning behavior in the hours leading up to the attack. Multiple staff members reported erratic conduct, paranoid statements, and refusal to follow established medical protocols. While we sympathize with her apparent mental health struggles, the safety of our patients and staff must come first. This is unbelievable. Morrison's hand slammed the table. They're throwing her under the bus to protect themselves from liability. The press conference continued. A lawyer Mia didn't recognize spoke about the hospital's commitment to employee wellness programs, about how they were reviewing their psychiatric screening procedures, about how this tragedy highlighted the need for better mental health resources in high-stress medical environments. They were painting her as unstable, as the problem, as someone whose paranoid delusions had somehow triggered a terrorist attack. Turn it off, Hawthorne ordered. The screen went dark, but the damage was done. Mia could feel the eyes in the room on her, could see the calculations happening behind professional facades. A disturbed employee was a liability. A hero nurse was an asset. The narrative was everything. They're protecting Dr. Westfield, Mia's voice sounded distant to her own ears. If I'm the unstable one, then his involvement looks less deliberate. Just a doctor who made a judgment call about a paranoid nurse. Exactly, Walsh was already typing on her laptop. Classic misdirection. Shift blame to the whistleblower, muddy the waters. Create reasonable doubt before charges are even filed. Morrison's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression darkened further. It's worse. Social media is running with it. Hashtag Nurse Chen Hospital Terror is trending. There are already deep dive threads pulling up every mistake you've ever made, every complaint ever filed against you. I've never had a formal complaint, Mia interrupted. They're inventing them, or reframing normal incidents as red flags. Morrison scrolled through her screen, disgust evident. Here's one claiming you were reprimanded for aggressive behavior with a patient's family. What actually happened? Mia had to think back. 3 months ago, a wife was trying to refuse life-saving surgery for her husband because of religious objections. I advocated strongly for the patient's right to make his own medical decisions. The ethics committee sided with me. Doesn't matter. In this narrative, you were aggressive and insubordinate. Morrison set her phone down like it had personally offended her. This is a coordinated campaign. Kozlov's people are feeding this story, amplifying it, making you the villain. The young analyst pulled up more screens. Twitter, Facebook, news comment sections, all flooded with speculation and accusation. Mia Chen had mental health issues. Mia Chen was obsessed with a homeless patient. Mia Chen's paranoid behavior triggered a lockdown that made the hospital vulnerable to attack. It was a masterpiece of disinformation, building a lie from fragments of truth, twisting context until reality itself became unrecognizable. "We need to get ahead of this," Walsh said. "Hold our own press conference. Set the record straight." "No!" Hawthorne's voice cut through the rising discussion. "We say nothing. Not yet. Sir, with respect, we can't let this narrative solidify. We can and we will. Because right now, while Kozlov's people think they've successfully discredited our primary witness, they're getting sloppy, they're celebrating, and sloppy people make mistakes." Hawthorne turned to Mia. "I know this is hard. I know watching your reputation get destroyed in real time is torture, but we need you to endure it for 72 hours while we work this investigation." 72 hours? Mia's voice cracked. "In 72 hours, my entire career will be destroyed. No hospital will ever hire me again. I'll be the nurse who went crazy and got people killed. Or you'll be the nurse who helped bring down an international criminal network." Morrison's tone was gentle but firm. "The truth will come out, Mia, but timing matters." Mia wanted to scream, wanted to storm out and hold her own press conference, tell the world what really happened, defend herself against the lies spreading like poison through every digital platform. But the tactical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive through last night's assault, understood the logic. If Kozlov thought she was discredited, neutralized as a threat, his network might relax their guard. "What do I do for 72 hours while my life burns down?" she asked quietly. "You help us build an airtight case," Walsh said. "You review surveillance footage, identify suspects, provide medical expertise on the injuries and deaths. You turn yourself into an expert witness so unimpeachable that when we do go public, your credibility will be unassailable." The door opened again, and a trauma surgeon in scrubs appeared, looking harried. "General Hawthorne?" "Colonel Mercer is awake and becoming agitated. He's demanding to see Nurse Chen. I can sedate him, but given his condition—" "I'll go." Mia stood before anyone could object. "He needs to stay calm for recovery. I can help with that." Hawthorne nodded. "Morrison, accompany her. Nobody gets near that room without clearance." The ICU was 2 floors up, isolated in a secure wing where armed guards checked IDs at every checkpoint. Mia's temporary credentials, issued sometime while she slept, got her through, but Morrison's presence smoothed the way. The soldiers recognized their captain and snapped to attention as she passed. The colonel's room was dimly lit, monitors glowing softly in the pre-dawn darkness. He looked terrible, face bruised and swollen, chest wrapped in bandages, tubes and wires connecting him to an array of medical equipment. But his eyes were clear when they found Mia, and the relief in them was unmistakable. "You're alive," he said, his voice rough from intubation. "They told me you were fine, but I needed to see for myself." "I could say the same thing." Mia moved to his bedside automatically, her hands checking his vitals with professional efficiency. Heart rate 68, steady. Blood pressure 118/76, excellent for post-op. Oxygen saturation 97%. "Your numbers look good. How's your pain level?" "Manageable. They've got me on enough morphine to drop an elephant." His hand reached for hers, gripped it with surprising strength. "I heard what they're saying about you. On the news, it's garbage, all of it." "I know. Do you? Because you look like you're internalizing their lies." His eyes searched her face. "You saved my life, Mia, multiple times. You stood up to doctors and administrators and armed killers, and you did it because you knew it was right. Don't let them rewrite that story." Mia felt tears threatening and forced them back. "It's hard not to when the entire internet is calling me crazy. The internet called me a traitor when I first went undercover with Kozlov, said I'd sold out my country, that I was working for the enemy." The colonel's jaw tightened with old anger. "People believe what they want to believe, especially when the truth is complicated. But you know what you did. I know what you did. That's what matters." Morrison cleared her throat from the doorway. "Sir, we need to debrief you when you're strong enough. The intelligence you gathered is critical to bringing down Kozlov's entire network. I'll tell you everything. But first," he looked at Mia, "I need you to understand something. What you stumbled into last night wasn't random. Kozlov has been using hospitals as killing grounds for years. He's got people embedded in medical systems across the country, and they're very good at making murder look natural. FBI already told me. They want me to help identify suspicious cases. Good. You should do it. The colonel shifted in bed, wincing at the pain. You've got the instincts for this work. You see patterns others miss. That's rare. I'm a nurse, not a detective. You're both now. Whether you wanted to be or not. His expression turned serious. But you need to know what you're up against. Kozlov doesn't forgive. The people in his network are true believers or thoroughly trapped. Either way, they're dangerous. You made them look incompetent. They'll want revenge. As if summoned by his words, Morrison's radio crackled with urgent traffic. She stepped into the hallway to respond, her voice too low for Mia to hear clearly. But her body language spoke volumes, shoulders tense, weapon hand moving unconsciously to check her sidearm. She returned with her face carved from stone. We've got a problem. One of Westfield's attorneys just posted bond for him. What? Mia's stomach dropped. How is that possible? He's a federal prisoner. Was a federal prisoner. Apparently his legal team found a judge willing to argue that the charges are overreaching, that Westfield is a victim of government overreach, that holding him violates due process. Morrison's disgust was palpable. The bond is $5 million. Someone posted it in cash. Kozlov, the colonel said flatly. He's buying Westfield's freedom to either extract him or silence him. FBI has him under surveillance, Morrison said. But if he runs, or if someone gets to him before we can secure him again, all his testimony becomes inadmissible, and the case falls apart. The colonel tried to sit up further, grimaced, fell back. You need to get him back into custody. Now! Morrison was already on her radio, coordinating with the FBI team. Mia stood frozen, watching it all unfold with a growing sense of unreality. Westfield was free. The man who'd tried to have the colonel killed, who'd participated in dozens of murders, who'd sold patient information to international criminals, he was walking around somewhere while she hid in a military hospital with her reputation in ruins. This is insane, she breathed. This is justice in a broken system, the colonel said bitterly. Money and connections trump truth every time. Unless we can prove intent beyond any doubt, Westfield walks. A new voice came from the doorway. General Hawthorne, his face tight with controlled fury. Westfield just gave a statement to the press. He's claiming he was coerced by federal agents into false confession. Says the real threat was Nurse Chen, whose mental instability created a dangerous situation that he tried to diffuse through proper medical channels. Mia felt the room tilt. He's blaming me? After everything? He's protecting himself and poisoning the well against you simultaneously. Hawthorne entered the room, his presence commanding despite the early hour. It's effective strategy. Jury pools are watching this coverage. By the time we get to trial, they'll have heard your name associated with terrorism and mental illness 1,000 times. So what do we do? Mia hated how helpless she sounded. We accelerate the timeline. Hawthorne pulled out his phone, began typing rapidly. Deputy Director Walsh has been building a parallel case using the evidence we gathered from the hospital. She's ready to move on the larger network, but she needs your testimony to establish probable cause for the wider arrests. My testimony that everyone thinks is the ranting of a disturbed nurse? Your testimony backed by forensic evidence, surveillance footage, and the physical evidence we collected from the assault. Hawthorne finished typing, looked up. We're going to hold a federal grand jury hearing today. Secret proceedings, no media, no public access. You testify to what you saw and experienced, we present our evidence, and we get indictments on the entire network before they can scatter. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Sir, that's moving extremely fast. Defense attorneys will scream about due process. Let them scream. We have 12 dead civilians and a compromised medical system. That gives us exigent circumstances. Hawthorne's expression was granite. The hearing is scheduled for 1400 hours. Nurse Chen, you have 6 hours to prepare your testimony. 6 hours. Mia's mind raced. What do I need to do? Everything you remember, every detail, every conversation, every moment from when the colonel first arrived until the assault ended. Walsh's team will help you organize it into a coherent timeline. Hawthorne moved toward the door, then paused. And Mia, when you're in that hearing room, don't hold back. Don't soften what happened or make excuses for anyone's behavior. The truth, unvarnished and complete, that's what will win this. The next 6 hours blurred into an intensive debriefing that left Mia mentally exhausted. FBI agents walked her through every minute of that night, asking for details she didn't realize she'd noticed. What was Westfield wearing? What exact words did he use? Where were his eyes focused when he gave orders? How did his body language change when the Pentagon called? They showed her surveillance footage from the hospital, grainy security camera images that captured Westfield in conversation with one of the attackers 3 days before the assault. The audio was too poor to hear, but the body language was damning. These weren't strangers meeting by chance. This was a planned coordination. More footage showed Hospital Administrator Hammond meeting with a man later identified as one of Kozlov's financial operatives. Money changing hands in a parking garage. Envelope passed in the cafeteria. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had realized. It wasn't just Westfield. It was a systemic infection that had compromised multiple levels of hospital leadership. Walsh appeared at noon with a cart of takeout food that Mia couldn't imagine eating. But the FBI deputy director insisted, practical and maternal despite her steel exterior. You need to eat. Low blood sugar makes you a bad witness. Walsh pushed a container of pasta toward her. I've seen strong people fall apart on the stand because they skipped lunch. Mia forced herself to eat, the food tasteless and mechanical. Morrison sat across from her, also eating, also preparing. The captain would be testifying too, providing military context for the assault. How do you do this? Mia asked quietly. Testify, I mean. Put yourself out there like that. I tell myself I'm speaking for people who can't speak for themselves. Morrison's voice was matter-of-fact. The soldiers who died because Kozlov sold intelligence. The patients who were murdered in their hospital beds. They can't tell their stories anymore. So I tell it for them. It was a simple philosophy, but it steadied something in Mia's chest. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every patient who'd trusted the medical system and been betrayed, for the security guards who'd died defending the hospital, for the colonel who'd nearly been executed in his hospital bed. At 13:45 hours, a federal marshal arrived to escort them to the courthouse. They traveled in an unmarked SUV with tinted windows, Morrison riding shotgun with her hand near her weapon. The streets of D.C. were typically congested, but their driver navigated with the kind of aggressive competence that suggested extensive tactical training. The courthouse was imposing, all granite columns and serious architecture meant to convey the weight of justice. They entered through a secure underground garage, bypassing the public entrances entirely. Armed marshals checked IDs at 3 separate checkpoints before they reached the grand jury chambers. Walsh met them in a secure waiting room. Final preparations. The grand jury has been briefed on the general nature of the case. Your job is to provide specific factual testimony about what you observed and experienced. Don't speculate, don't interpret, just facts. The prosecutors will guide you through the timeline. Mia's hands were shaking again. She pressed them together, forcing steadiness. What if I forget something important? Then we'll ask follow-up questions to jog your memory. This isn't a performance, Mia. It's just you telling the truth. Walsh's expression softened marginally. You've already done the hard part. You survived. Now you just have to remember. The grand jury room was smaller than Mia expected. Maybe 20 people seated in tiered rows looking down at a witness chair that sat isolated in the center. A court reporter waited beside her machine, fingers poised. 2 prosecutors stood near a presentation screen, files and laptops arrayed on their table. Mia was sworn in, her hand on a Bible that felt simultaneously heavy and insubstantial. She sat in the witness chair, hyper-aware of every eye on her, every judgment forming behind neutral expressions. The lead prosecutor was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a voice that could cut steel when needed. Please state your name and occupation for the record. Mia Chen, registered nurse, emergency department, Mercy Heights Medical Center. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. Nurse Chen, I want to direct your attention to the evening of... The prosecutor began walking her through the timeline, question by careful question, building the story from the moment the paramedics wheeled the colonel through the ED doors. Mia answered, detail by detail, watching the grand jury members take notes. Some faces showed shock, as she described Westfield's insistence on transferring an unstable patient. Others showed anger when she testified about being physically removed by security while the patient deteriorated. The prosecutors played audio from the Pentagon call, the recording crisp and damning. They showed surveillance footage of Westfield coordinating with known Kozlov operatives. They presented phone records showing communications between hospital administrators and shell companies linked to Kozlov's network. The evidence was overwhelming, but it was Mia's testimony that tied it together, the human element that transformed abstract corruption into visceral betrayal. Nurse Chen, the prosecutor said, 3 hours into testimony, "Why did you refuse to transfer the patient when your supervisor ordered you to?" Mia took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "Because my assessment told me he was critically unstable. Because the timeline didn't make sense. Because I'm a nurse, and my primary obligation is to my patient's welfare, not to hospital efficiency or physician convenience. I saw someone who needed help, and everything in my training told me that moving him would kill him." Even knowing you might lose your job? Even knowing that? Because if I'd walked away and he died, I'd have had to live with that for the rest of my life. Mia met the prosecutor's eyes. "I became a nurse to help people, not to process them efficiently. That man needed an advocate, so I advocated." One of the grand jury members, an older woman in the front row, wiped her eyes. Others nodded, some almost imperceptibly. The testimony continued. Morrison took the stand and detailed the assault with military precision, her tactical analysis highlighting how the attackers had used hospital systems against themselves. A forensic accountant traced money flows from Kozlov's network to Westfield's offshore accounts, $3 million over 18 months, payment for information that led to at least 16 deaths. By the time they finished, it was nearly 8 p.m. The grand jury deliberated for 43 minutes before returning with their decision. Indictments. All of them. Dr. Marcus Westfield, conspiracy to commit murder, providing material support to a terrorist organization, conspiracy against rights, and 18 counts of first-degree murder. Director Blake Hammond, conspiracy, accepting bribes, obstruction of justice. 4 other hospital administrators and staff members whose involvement had been uncovered through the investigation, and 14 members of Kozlov's network identified through the assault and subsequent investigation. Walsh delivered the news with grim satisfaction. "We'll be executing arrest warrants within the hour. Federal marshals are positioning now." "What about Westfield?" Mia asked. "He's already out on bond. His bail is being revoked as we speak. New charges supersede the original release conditions." Walsh's smile was sharp. "He'll be back in custody before midnight." Mia should have felt victorious, should have felt vindicated. Instead, she just felt hollow and exhausted, her body running on fumes and determination alone. Morrison guided her back to the SUV, one hand hovering near Mia's elbow in silent support. They were halfway back to Walter Reed when Morrison's phone erupted with alerts. "What the hell?" The captain's face went pale as she read. "Pull over. Now." The driver obeyed instantly, wheels screeching as they jerked to the shoulder. Morrison thrust her phone at Mia, the screen showing a news alert that made the world tilt sideways. Breaking. Dr. Marcus Westfield found dead in apparent suicide. Federal witness dies hours before scheduled rearrest. Below the headline, the article detailed how Westfield had been found in his attorney's office, dead from a single gunshot wound to the head. A note allegedly claimed he couldn't live with the guilt of his actions. Law enforcement was investigating, but preliminary evidence suggested self-inflicted death. "No," Mia breathed. "Sit. No, this is a hit disguised as suicide." Morrison was already on her radio, coordinating with Walsh's team. "Kozlov got to him before we could secure him, silenced him permanently." The implications crashed over Mia in waves. Westfield's testimony, his detailed knowledge of the network, his ability to identify other compromised personnel, gone forever. The case would continue with the evidence they had, but without his cooperation, dozens of co-conspirators might escape justice. Walsh's voice came through Morrison's phone, tight with fury. "Preliminary scene analysis shows signs of staging. Gunshot residue pattern is wrong for self-infliction. Angles off, but his security detail swears no one entered the office except his attorneys." "One of the attorneys," Morrison said grimly, "has to be. Kozlov owned someone in his legal team. Mia stared at the phone screen, at Westfield's professional headshot accompanying the article, the same arrogant face that had dismissed her concerns, the same man who'd tried to have the colonel killed, now forever beyond justice or redemption. "He doesn't get to escape this way," she said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "He doesn't get to die and have people remember him as someone overcome with guilt. He was a murderer and a traitor, and the world needs to know that." "They will," Morrison promised. "The grand jury indictments are public record now. His crimes are documented. Death doesn't erase that." But death did complicate everything. The media was already spinning it. Tragic physician driven to suicide by overzealous prosecution, a man who'd made mistakes but couldn't live with the consequences. Some outlets were questioning whether the federal case had been too aggressive, whether Westfield might have been innocent and the pressure too much to bear. The narrative was slipping again, reality bending under the weight of manipulation and carefully placed lies. They made it back to Walter Reed in tense silence. Mia went straight to the colonel's room, needing to see him alive and recovering, needing proof that all of this had been worth something. He was awake, watching news coverage on the room's television, his face tight with anger. "You heard? About Westfield?" "Yeah." Mia slumped into the visitor's chair. "Kozlov killed him." "Of course he did. Can't have witnesses testifying." The colonel muted the television. "But this doesn't change the fundamental case. We still have the financial records, the surveillance footage, the testimony from the shooters we captured. Westfield was important, but he wasn't the only thread." "It feels like we're losing." Mia hated admitting it. "Every time we get ahead, they pull something new. My reputation's destroyed, our key witness is dead, and Kozlov's still out there." "We're not losing. We're fighting." The colonel's hand found hers. "And fighting means taking hits. But you're still standing, Mia. After everything they've thrown at you, you're still here, still fighting. That matters." Morrison appeared in the doorway, her expression urgent. "We need to move you both, now. FBI just intercepted chatter suggesting another assault is being planned." "On the hospital?" Mia's heart rate spiked. "On you specifically. Kozlov's people know you're the linchpin witness. With Westfield dead, you're the primary testimony tying everything together." Morrison was already helping the colonel prepare for transport, disconnecting monitoring leads and switching him to portable systems. "We're relocating both of you to a secure facility. Wheels up in 20 minutes. The next 20 minutes were controlled chaos. Medical personnel rushed to stabilize the colonel for transport, while federal agents secured the corridors. Mia was hustled into body armor that felt absurdly heavy, given a crash helmet, and briefed on emergency procedures she prayed she wouldn't need to use. They moved through the hospital at a near run, the colonel on a gurney surrounded by armed guards, Mia keeping pace beside him. Outside, 2 Black Hawk helicopters waited with rotors spinning, their side guns manned and ready. Mia was pushed into the lead helicopter, Morrison right behind her. The colonel went into the second bird with his medical team. Both aircraft lifted off simultaneously, tilting forward into flight before they'd even cleared the building's roof height. Through the open door, Mia could see Washington, D.C. spreading below them, monuments lit up in the darkness, the Capitol dome glowing white, the Pentagon's distinctive shape visible in the distance. Somewhere down there, people were planning her death, coordinating, moving pieces into position. Morrison handed her a headset so they could communicate over the rotor noise. "Where are we going?" "Secure facility in West Virginia. Underground, defended, completely isolated from civilian infrastructure. You'll be safe there while we roll up the rest of Kozlov's network." "How long?" "However long it takes." Morrison's expression was apologetic. "Could be days, could be weeks, but you'll have everything you need. Medical care for the colonel, accommodations for you, security that makes Fort Knox look like a convenience store." The helicopter banked sharply, and Mia's stomach lurched. Below them, the landscape was transitioning from urban sprawl to suburban darkness to rural emptiness. They were leaving civilization behind, heading into the mountains where secrets could be kept and witnesses could be hidden. Morrison's radio crackled with an update that made her swear. "Say again, Havoc 1? Confirm your report." The pilot's voice came through, tense and controlled. "Havoc 6, we've got a radar contact showing unauthorized aircraft approaching from the southwest. Two helicopters, civilian configuration but flying in military formation. They're on an intercept course. Kozlov's people. Morrison's weapon came up automatically. How long until they're in range? 3 minutes at current speeds. We can try to outrun them, but the medical bird is slower. They'll catch us before we reach the facility. Morrison's jaw set in a hard line. She looked at Mia, then at the pilot. Options? We can split up. Lead bird draws them off while medical bird makes for the facility. That puts Nurse Chen in the kill zone. It also puts the colonel in the clear. That's the mission priority, ma'am. Mia's hands gripped the seat restraint so hard her knuckles went white. After everything, surviving the hospital assault, testifying before the grand jury, enduring the character assassination, it was going to end here, in a helicopter chase over the West Virginia mountains. The pursuing aircraft appeared in the distance, navigation lights visible against the darkness. They were closing fast, and Mia could see weapons mounted on their sides, door guns that could shred their helicopter in seconds. Morrison made her decision. Execute the split. Medical bird goes to ground, takes evasive route to the facility. We'll lead them away and engage if necessary. Captain, Mia started, not up for debate. Colonel Mercer's testimony is irreplaceable. You're valuable, but he's critical. Morrison's voice was firm, but not unkind. We'll lose them in the mountains and link up with you at the facility. Just another day at the office. The helicopter split, the medical bird peeling off toward a narrow valley while their aircraft climbed toward higher terrain. The pursuing helicopters hesitated for just a moment, then both turned to follow Mia's bird. They're targeting us, the pilot reported. They know which one she's in. Morrison swore again. How? Doesn't matter. We've got company and they're armed. Request permission to engage. Granted. Light them up. The door gunner opened fire, tracer rounds arcing through the darkness toward the pursuing aircraft. Return fire came immediately, bullets pinging off the helicopter's armored hull, spiderwebbing the cockpit glass. The pilot threw them into a hard banking turn that made Mia's stomach revolt, diving toward a ridgeline with clearance measured in feet rather than yards. They're hurting us, the pilot said through gritted teeth, trying to force us into a box canyon where we can't maneuver. Then don't go where they want. Morrison was ice calm despite the bullets tearing through the air around them. Find us an out. The pilot banked again, this time toward a gap between two peaks that looked impossibly narrow. Trees rushed past close enough to touch, rock walls rising on either side. Behind them, the pursuing helicopters tried to follow, but they were larger, less maneuverable. One pulled up at the last second, aborting the chase rather than risk collision. But the second kept coming, its pilot either braver or crazier or both. Mia could see the door gunner clearly now, his weapon tracking their aircraft, finger on the trigger. Morrison's door gunner fired first, a sustained burst that caught the pursuing helicopter's tail rotor, shredding it into metal confetti. The aircraft spun wildly, lost altitude, and disappeared below the ridgeline. A moment later, an orange fireball lit up the valley, smoke rising into the night sky. Splash one, the door gunner reported. Where's the second aircraft? Morrison demanded. Lost visual. They might have broken off. Wait, radar contact. They're circling around, trying to get ahead of us. The pilot pushed their helicopter harder, engine whining with the strain. They burst out of the narrow valley into more open airspace, but the pursuing helicopter was already there, cutting off their route to the facility. And this time, they weren't using small arms. The missile launch was visible as a bright flare in the darkness. Heat-seeking, probably a Stinger or something similar. Commercial helicopters didn't have countermeasures, didn't have flares or chaff or any of the defensive systems that might save them. Missile inbound, the pilot shouted. Brace for impact. Morrison grabbed Mia, forcing her down into the most protected position possible. Keep your head down and don't look up. The helicopter dove, the pilot throwing them into a descent so steep it felt like falling. Trees rushed up to meet them, branches reaching like grasping fingers. The missile followed, tracking their heat signature with relentless precision. Then the pilot pulled up hard, skimming just above the tree line. The missile, unable to match the maneuver, slammed into the forest below them. The explosion lit up the night, a column of fire and debris erupting where they'd been seconds before. Holy! The pilot's voice was shaking. That was too close! But they weren't clear yet. The pursuing helicopter came around for another pass, and Mia could see them loading another missile. In seconds, they'd fire again, and this time the pilot's luck might run out. Morrison made a decision that changed everything. She grabbed the radio and broadcast on all frequencies. "Attention hostile aircraft. This is Captain Sarah Morrison, United States Army. You are engaging a federal law enforcement operation. Break off immediately or face military intervention." For a moment, nothing. Then a voice came back, accented and cold. "There is no military intervention coming, Captain. You're alone. Give us the nurse, and we'll let you live." "That's not happening." "Then you'll die together. Your choice." The voice clicked off. The pursuing helicopter moved into firing position. Morrison's door gunner opened up with everything he had, but the range was too great, the angle too poor. The missile launched, and then, from above and behind, a new voice cut through the radio. American accent, military precision, backed by the unmistakable sound of jet engines. "Hostile aircraft. This is Viper-led, U.S. Air Force. You are ordered to land immediately or you will be engaged. You have 10 seconds to comply." Mia looked up and saw them. 2 F-16 fighters dropping out of the clouds above, afterburners glowing in the darkness. The cavalry, arriving exactly when needed. The pursuing helicopter broke off the missile track, banking hard away from the engagement. But the F-16s were faster, more maneuverable, and absolutely unforgiving. Mia watched as one fighter lined up a shot and fired, a single missile that streaked across the sky and turned the hostile helicopter into a falling fireball. "Threat neutralized," Viper-led reported calmly. "Medical transport, you are clear to proceed to your destination. We'll maintain escort until you're on the ground." The relief was so intense Mia thought she might pass out. Morrison released her grip, and Mia realized the captain's hands were shaking too, just the finest tremor, but unmistakable. "How did they know to come?" Mia asked. "General Hawthorne." Morrison's voice was tight. "He must have authorized air support when the pursuit started. Good thing he did." The rest of the flight passed in stunned silence, the F-16s flanking them like guardian angels. They landed at a facility that looked like nothing from the outside, just another mountain with trees and rocks. But doors slid open in the hillside, revealing a hangar carved from living stone, and they descended into an underground complex that could have housed a small army. Medical personnel rushed to meet them, immediately taking charge of preparing for the colonel's arrival. Mia was guided to a secure briefing room where General Hawthorne waited, looking every year of his age and then some. "Are you hurt?" he asked without preamble. "No, shaken, but not hurt." "Good, because we've got a situation." He pulled up a screen showing news coverage. "Kozlov just released a statement claiming his people were acting in self-defense against an illegal government kidnapping operation. He's painting you as a CIA asset who infiltrated the hospital to eliminate a rival intelligence operative." Mia stared at the screen, at her own face labeled "Federal Operative" in screaming headlines. The narrative had shifted again, reality bending under the weight of propaganda and carefully orchestrated lies. "This is insane," she whispered. "This is information warfare." Hawthorne's expression was grim. "And Kozlov just escalated to a level we didn't anticipate. He's not just trying to kill you anymore. He's trying to turn you into a symbol, proof that the U.S. government operates rogue elements who murder civilians. Every attack on you becomes evidence of government desperation. Every defense we make sounds like a cover-up. So what do we do?" Hawthorne's smile was sharp and utterly without humor. "We stop playing defense. Tomorrow morning, we're holding a press conference. You, Colonel Mercer, the FBI, and the Secretary of Defense. We're going to tell the whole story, everything from the first moment you recognize something was wrong to the assault to tonight's helicopter chase. No more secrets, no more careful timing. We're putting it all on record. Kozlov will try to stop it." "Let him try." The general's voice was steel. "We've got the truth. We've got the evidence. And we've got a nurse who refused to back down even when the whole world told her she was wrong. That's a story that cuts through propaganda. That's a story people will believe." Morrison appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with soot from the burning helicopter. "Sir, we've got another problem. The hospital board just announced they're suing Mia Chen for wrongful termination of care, claiming her actions led to the deaths during the assault. The lawsuits were coming now, the legal assault following the physical one. They were attacking from every angle, trying to bury her under so much litigation and accusation that the truth would be lost in the noise. But as Mia looked around the room, at Hawthorne's determined expression, at Morrison's fierce loyalty, at the screens showing evidence that would expose Kozlov's entire network, she felt something shift inside her. She'd been running defense since the moment she refused to transfer that patient. Reacting, surviving, enduring. It was time to attack. "General," she said quietly, "about that press conference tomorrow, I have some things I'd like to say." Hawthorne's smile turned genuine. "I'm sure you do, Nurse Chen. I'm sure you do." Outside the briefing room, alarms suddenly screamed to life. Red emergency lights began strobing in the corridors. Morrison's radio exploded with frantic traffic about a perimeter breach, about hostiles inside the facility, about... The explosion tore through the western wall with a roar that shook the mountain itself. The explosion tore through the western wall with a roar that shook the mountain itself, sending concrete dust and metal fragments ricocheting through the corridors. Mia hit the floor hard, Morrison's body covering hers before she'd even registered the captain's movement. The emergency lights strobed chaos across walls that suddenly looked far less secure than they had seconds ago. Hawthorne was already on his feet, barking orders into his radio. "Seal all interior blast doors, get me a damage report and locate those hostiles now." Morrison pulled Mia upright with one hand while drawing her sidearm with the other. "Stay behind me. Move when I move. Stop when I stop." They ran through corridors that had transformed from secure facility to combat zone, passing soldiers in full tactical gear rushing toward the breach point. Mia's medical training screamed at her to help. She could see wounded personnel being dragged away from the explosion site, blood trails marking their passage. But Morrison's grip on her arm was unrelenting. "The colonel," Mia gasped. "Where is he?" "Medical wing, opposite side of the facility. That's where we're going." Morrison yanked her around a corner, just as gunfire erupted from the direction they'd come. "They're trying to draw us into a kill zone. Standard breach and clear tactics." But these weren't standard attackers. Through the chaos, Mia caught glimpses of the assault team, professional movement, military-grade weapons, coordinated hand signals that spoke of extensive training. Kozlov wasn't sending thugs anymore. He was sending specialists. They reached the medical wing to find it already locked down, blast doors sealed and armed guards at every intersection. The colonel's room was at the center of a defensive position that could have held off a small army. Morrison flashed credentials, and they were waved through, entering a space that felt simultaneously like a hospital and a bunker. The colonel was sitting up in bed despite his injuries, a sidearm on the table beside him, and his face set in hard lines. "How many?" "At least a dozen confirmed hostiles," Morrison reported. "They breached the western perimeter with shaped charges. Professional grade, probably C4. This isn't a raid, it's a full assault. They're desperate." The colonel's voice was tight with pain, but his mind was clearly sharp. "The grand jury indictment spooked them. They know we're closing the net, so they're making one last push to eliminate the witnesses before we can testify publicly." Hawthorne appeared in the doorway, his uniform dusty but his bearing unshaken. "Reinforcements are inbound. 2 platoons from Fort Belvoir, ETA 14 minutes. We need to hold until they arrive." 14 minutes is a lifetime in a firefight," Morrison said. "Then make every second count." Hawthorne turned to Mia. "There's a secure bunker 3 levels down, designed for exactly this scenario. We're evacuating you there now." "What about the colonel? He can't be moved safely." "He stays here with a full security detail. You're the priority, Nurse Chen. Without your testimony at tomorrow's press conference, this entire operation falls apart." Hawthorne's tone brooked no argument. "Captain Morrison will escort you to the bunker. The rest of us hold this position." The journey to the bunker level was a descent into increasing security. Biometric scanners at every checkpoint, blast doors that could withstand direct artillery hits, air filtration systems designed to protect against chemical and biological threats. By the time they reached the final level, Mia felt like she'd traveled to the center of the earth. The bunker itself was surprisingly comfortable, more executive safe room than military hole. Monitors showed feeds from throughout the facility, displaying the battle raging above in real time. Mia watched soldiers engaging the attackers in a running firefight through corridors and stairwells, both sides using cover and tactical movement that looked nothing like the chaotic gunfights portrayed in movies. Morrison positioned herself between Mia and the door, weapon ready, eyes scanning the monitors with professional focus. We're as safe here as we can be. Even if they breach every other level, they'd need specialized equipment to get through these doors. How did they even find this place? Mia's hands were shaking again, adrenaline and exhaustion warring in her system. This facility is supposed to be secret. Someone talked, or someone in the network had access to classified location data. Morrison's jaw tightened. Doesn't matter how right now. What matters is we hold until the reinforcements arrive and then we evacuate you to an even more secure location. One of the monitors showed the western breach point, where attackers were pushing deeper into the facility despite heavy resistance. Another showed the medical wing, where soldiers had established a defensive perimeter around the colonel's room. The building was being torn apart from the inside, years of planning and construction reduced to a battlefield in minutes. Then one monitor flickered and showed something that made Morrison swear viciously. The feed was from an exterior camera showing the mountain approach road, and climbing that road was a convoy of black SUVs, at least 8 vehicles, all heavily armored. That's not reinforcements, Morrison said. That's wave 2 of the assault. They're escalating. She was on her radio immediately, warning the command center. Hawthorne's response was crackling with static, but clear enough. Acknowledged. Air support is scrambling but won't arrive before those vehicles do. All units prepare for sustained engagement. The bunker's emergency communication system crackled to life, a voice Mia didn't recognize coming through with urgent authority. This is FBI Deputy Director Walsh. I'm patching through on secure channels because you need to hear this. We just arrested 3 individuals attempting to breach DOJ headquarters in Washington. They were carrying explosives and detailed plans for a coordinated strike. Under interrogation, one of them broke. Mia, they weren't just targeting you. They were targeting everyone involved in tomorrow's press conference. The Secretary of Defense, the FBI Director, federal prosecutors. This was meant to be a decapitation strike. Mia felt ice flood her veins. They're trying to kill everyone who knows the truth. Not just kill, terrorize. Make an example so extreme that no one would dare testify against Kozlov again. Walsh's voice was grim. But here's the important part. The suspect gave us a name. The person coordinating all of this, managing Kozlov's entire U.S. network. Morrison leaned toward the speaker. Who? Senator Richard Caldwell, Armed Services Committee, Oversight of Military Medical Facilities, Access to Classified Intelligence on Federal Witness Protection. Walsh's words dropped like bombs. He's been on Kozlov's payroll for 6 years. Every safe house location, every witness identity, every federal operation against the network, Caldwell fed it all to them. The implications were staggering. A sitting U.S. senator as the linchpin of an international criminal conspiracy. Mia's mind reeled, trying to process the depth of corruption this revealed. That's how they found this facility, Morrison breathed. Caldwell had access to the construction records, the location data, everything. Exactly. And it gets worse. Walsh's voice hardened. Caldwell is currently at a secure location with the vice president, supposedly for a classified briefing. He doesn't know we've identified him yet. We're moving to arrest him now, but if he gets wind of this before we have him in custody... The monitor feeds suddenly went dark, all of them simultaneously cutting to static. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the bunker in red illumination that made everything look like a scene from a nightmare. Morrison's radio erupted with panicked chatter. All units, we have a catastrophic power failure. Primary and secondary systems are down. Switch to battery backup and defensive positions. Caldwell. Mia's voice was barely a whisper. He's sabotaging the facility remotely. He has access to the systems. Not just access, control. Morrison was already moving, checking the bunker door's manual locks. He built a back door into the security systems when this place was constructed. He's been able to compromise it all along. The bunker door's electronic lock disengaged with a hiss of hydraulics. Morrison threw herself against it, manually engaging the mechanical backup locks, but through the gap, Mia could see figures moving in the corridor beyond. Tactical gear, weapons raised, advancing with professional precision. They're inside. Morrison's voice was ice-calm despite the situation. Get behind the server rack. Stay low and don't make a sound. Mia scrambled for cover as Morrison took position behind a reinforced desk, her weapon trained on the door. The attackers weren't subtle. They blew the door's hinges with breaching charges that filled the bunker with smoke and ringing concussion. 3 men entered fast, weapons sweeping for targets. Morrison dropped the first with 2-shot center mass, shifted aim, and hit the second in the shoulder. The third got a shot off that punched through the desk inches from Morrison's head before she put him down. But more were coming. Mia could hear them in the corridor, coordinating, preparing to flood the room with overwhelming force. Morrison ejected her spent magazine and reloaded with movements so practiced they looked choreographed. "When I say run," Morrison said quietly, "you go through that emergency exit behind you. It leads to a service tunnel that comes out half a mile from here. Don't stop, don't look back, just run. I'm not leaving you. You're the mission. I'm the shield." Morrison's eyes never left the doorway. "On my mark. 3, 2. The explosion came from above instead of through the door, a breaching charge on the ceiling that dropped 2 attackers directly into the bunker. Morrison engaged them immediately, but one rolled behind cover and came up firing. Mia felt something hot tear across her upper arm, pain blooming bright and immediate. Then the corridor beyond erupted with gunfire from a different direction. American voices shouting tactical commands, attackers returning fire and then falling back under sustained assault. The cavalry had arrived, Hawthorne's reinforcements, early and hitting hard. Morrison used the distraction to advance, clearing corners with professional efficiency. Within 30 seconds, the immediate threat was neutralized and soldiers in U.S. Army uniforms were securing the bunker. A medic appeared at Mia's side, already assessing her arm wound. "Through and through, clean entry and exit. You got lucky." Mia looked at the blood soaking her sleeve and almost laughed at calling that lucky. But compared to the alternative, compared to what would have happened if those reinforcements had been 60 seconds later, maybe lucky was exactly the right word. Hawthorne strode into the bunker, his face carved from granite. "Facility is secure. We killed or captured 17 hostiles. The convoy outside broke off when our air support arrived. 2 Apache gunships convinced them to reconsider their assault." He looked at Mia, at the medic bandaging her arm. "You hurt bad?" "I'll live." "Good, because Walsh just confirmed they have Caldwell in custody. He tried to run when FBI agents arrived for the arrest, resisted, made the whole thing easier from a prosecution standpoint." Hawthorne's smile was sharp. "He's already trying to make a deal, offering to testify against Kozlov in exchange for reduced charges." "He doesn't get a deal," Mia said, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. "He sold out his country. He got people killed. He doesn't get to bargain his way out of consequences." "Normally I'd agree. But his testimony could bring down Kozlov's entire network, not just the U.S. operations, but the international connections too." Hawthorne's expression was conflicted. "Sometimes justice means making deals with devils to catch bigger devils." The medic finished with Mia's arm, pressing pain medication into her hand that she swallowed without question. The immediate crisis was over, but the larger battle was just beginning. Tomorrow's press conference had just become exponentially more significant and more dangerous. They moved the colonel to a new location, a facility that even Caldwell hadn't known about because it was so new it hadn't been entered into official records yet. Mia rode in the medical transport with him, watching his monitors and adjusting his medications while Morrison maintained constant radio contact with the security convoy surrounding them. "How are you holding up?" the colonel asked during a quiet moment, his voice rough but present. "I've been shot at, blown up, and nearly killed in a bunker I was told was impregnable. I'm fantastic." Mia adjusted his IV flow, hands moving on autopilot. "How are you?" "Alive, thanks to you. Still trying to process that a U.S. senator was trying to have me killed." He closed his eyes briefly. "I've seen corruption before, worked undercover in some of the darkest organizations on the planet, but somehow it hits different when it's someone who's supposed to represent the people. Tomorrow we tell everyone exactly who he is and what he's done." Mia checked the bandage on her arm, felt the throb of pain beneath. No more secrets, no more careful timing, just the truth. They reached the new facility as dawn was breaking over the Virginia countryside. A converted Cold War bunker upgraded with modern security, but still maintaining that underlying aesthetic of paranoid preparation. Mia was shown to quarters that were more comfortable than she'd expected, with a real bed and a bathroom that had actual hot water. She showered, watching blood and grime circle the drain again, and tried not to think about how this was becoming a pattern. Every time she cleaned up after surviving another attack, she felt pieces of her old life washing away too. The nurse who'd shown up for a regular night shift 4 days ago felt like a different person entirely. Someone naive and unburdened who'd never had to make life or death decisions under fire. Morrison knocked while Mia was changing into clean clothes, another mysteriously perfect fit provided by whoever was managing logistics. Press conference is scheduled for 900 hours. That gives you 3 hours to prepare your statement. My statement? Mia sat heavily on the bed. What am I supposed to say? Hi, everyone. I'm the crazy nurse from the news, except I'm not actually crazy. And by the way, a U.S. senator tried to have me killed? You tell them exactly what happened. Start to finish, no embellishment, just facts. Morrison sat beside her, the captain's professional facade cracking slightly. And you tell them why it matters. Why one nurse refusing to follow an illegal order exposed an entire network of corruption. That's the story that cuts through the noise. Deputy Director Walsh arrived an hour later with a team of prosecutors and media advisors who descended on Mia like a well-meaning hurricane. They walked her through the press conference format, rehearsed likely questions, advised on tone and body language, and all the theater that went into managing public perception. The key is credibility, one advisor said, a sharp-eyed woman who'd apparently managed crisis communications for 3 different presidential administrations. You're going up against a coordinated disinformation campaign that's had days to establish its narrative. We need to demolish that in the first 60 seconds, or everything else you say will be filtered through their framing. They showed her the latest attacks, social media posts claiming she was a crisis actor, conspiracy theories about her being a deep state plant, doctored photos supposedly showing her at CIA training facilities. The lies were creative and persistent and apparently believed by enough people to make Mia want to scream. How do I fight that? She asked. How do I convince people when they've already decided I'm lying? You don't convince everyone. You can't. Walsh's voice was matter-of-fact. But you convince enough people. The ones who are still open to evidence, who haven't completely retreated into their chosen narratives. For them, your testimony backed by forensic evidence and Senator Caldwell's arrest will be enough. The colonel was wheeled in 30 minutes before the press conference, still connected to IV lines but alert and determined. Hawthorne had approved his participation against medical advice. The symbolism of having the witness and his defender standing together was too powerful to pass up. Ready? He asked Mia. Terrified, but ready. Good. Terror means you understand the stakes. His hand found hers, squeezed briefly. We're going to walk out there and tell the truth, and the truth is going to hit like a sledgehammer. The press conference was being held in a secure government building in downtown Washington, with media from every major outlet crowded into a room designed for half the attendees. Mia could see cameras everywhere, reporters with notebooks and recording devices, photographers jockeying for position. Standing at the entrance, waiting for their cue, Mia felt her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Morrison stood to her left, the colonel in his wheelchair to her right. General Hawthorne and Deputy Director Walsh flanked them, a wall of federal authority backing her testimony. The FBI director stepped to the podium first, his voice carrying the weight of institutional credibility. Good morning. I'm here to discuss a matter of national security that has implications for every American who seeks medical care. 4 days ago, a nurse at Mercy Heights Medical Center in Harbor City recognized signs that a patient was in danger. When she refused to follow orders that would have resulted in that patient's death, she was threatened, dismissed, and physically removed from her position. That patient was Colonel Daniel Mercer, a federal operative engaged in a classified investigation. The doctor who tried to have him transferred was Dr. Marcus Westfield, who we now know was part of an international criminal network led by arms dealer Viktor Kozlov. The room erupted with questions, reporters shouting over each other. The FBI director held up a hand for silence. Dr. Westfield is dead, killed to prevent his testimony. But before his death, federal investigators uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that extends far beyond one hospital. We have identified compromised medical personnel in 15 states, all feeding information about high-value patients to Kozlov's network. These patients were then targeted for assassination disguised as medical complications. More questions, more shouting. The director pressed on. Yesterday, we arrested Senator Richard Caldwell on charges of conspiracy, espionage, and providing material support to a terrorist organization. Senator Caldwell used his position on the Armed Services Committee to provide Kozlov with classified information about federal witnesses, safe house locations, and active investigations. His betrayal directly led to multiple deaths and compromised national security on a scale we are still assessing. The room went silent at that. A sitting senator arrested for treason. It was the kind of headline that stopped everything else cold. The person who started this investigation, who refused to back down even when threatened with termination, and worse, is here today. Nurse Mia Chen, along with Colonel Mercer, will now tell you exactly what happened. Mia stepped to the podium on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The cameras focused on her with predatory intensity, every lens recording every micro-expression. This was it, the moment where she reclaimed her narrative or was destroyed by it. She began speaking, her voice steadier than she felt. 4 days ago, I was working a night shift in the emergency department when paramedics brought in a patient everyone assumed was homeless. But I've been a trauma nurse for 6 years, and I've learned to see what others miss. This patient had combat scars, controlled breathing patterns, and tried to communicate in what I recognized as military code. When I reported my concerns to the attending physician, Dr. Marcus Westfield, he dismissed them. He ordered the patient transferred to a shelter observation unit, essentially sending him to die alone and unmonitored. She paused, letting that sink in. I refused, not because I was insubordinate or mentally unstable, as some have claimed. I refused because my primary obligation as a nurse is to my patient's welfare, not to hospital efficiency or physician ego. I assessed that transferring him would result in his death, and I couldn't allow that to happen. The colonel wheeled himself forward, joining her at the podium. Nurse Chen saved my life, multiple times. First by refusing to abandon me when everyone else wanted me gone. Then by keeping me alive through a sustained assault by Kozlov's operatives who attacked the hospital specifically to eliminate me. She performed emergency cardiac procedures under fire, advocated for my care when hospital administration tried to cover up what was happening, and testified before a grand jury despite death threats and a coordinated campaign to destroy her credibility. Mia took over again. The attacks on my reputation began immediately. I was called paranoid, unstable, a disturbed employee whose mental health struggles triggered a tragedy. Hospital administrators held press conferences blaming me for security failures. Social media campaigns labeled me everything from a crisis actor to a deep state operative. All of it was designed to discredit my testimony before I could testify. All of it was orchestrated by people who knew that if the truth came out, their entire network would collapse. Walsh stepped forward with a tablet displaying images on the screens behind them. These are financial records showing payments from Kozlov's network to Dr. Westfield, $3 million over 18 months. These are communications between Westfield and known Kozlov operatives, coordinating information about high-value patients. These are surveillance images from the hospital showing administrators meeting with the same operatives. The evidence is extensive, documented, and irrefutable. A reporter shouted a question. How do we know these documents are legitimate and not fabricated? Because Senator Caldwell confirmed their authenticity when he attempted to broker a deal with federal prosecutors, Walsh said flatly. He provided additional documentation in hopes of reducing his charges. That documentation included payment records, communication logs, and operational details that corroborate every aspect of Nurse Chen's testimony. Mia watched the reporters processing this, saw the calculation happening in real time. Caldwell's arrest changed everything, gave credibility to claims that might otherwise have seemed too extreme to believe. Another reporter stood. Nurse Chen, you've been accused of manufacturing this entire crisis for attention or because of personal instability. How do you respond to those allegations? Mia looked directly at the camera. I respond by pointing to the 12 people who died at Mercy Heights Medical Center, to the 17 Kozlov operatives killed or captured in subsequent assaults, to Senator Caldwell in federal custody. to the grand jury indictments of 23 individuals involved in this network. If I manufactured all of that, I'm the most elaborate crisis actor in history. Or, much more simply, I'm a nurse who did her job and exposed a conspiracy that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. The colonel added, "The people attacking Nurse Chen's credibility are the same people who spent years murdering patients in hospitals and calling it natural death. They're desperate to make this about one unstable nurse rather than systemic corruption because their entire operation depends on remaining invisible. Mia Chen made them visible. That's why they're trying so hard to destroy her." Hawthorne stepped forward, his general's bearing commanding attention. "The Department of Defense has conducted an independent review of the incident at Mercy Heights and the subsequent attacks. Our findings confirm every aspect of Nurse Chen's account. Furthermore, we have identified multiple instances where Kozlov's network used medical facilities to eliminate federal witnesses or operatives. The scope of this conspiracy extends beyond what we can fully disclose in this setting, but I want to be clear. Nurse Chen is not a suspect. She is a witness, a victim, and frankly, a hero who exposed something the rest of us missed." The questions continued for another 40 minutes, reporters pressing for details on Caldwell's involvement, on Kozlov's current whereabouts, on how the hospital board was responding. Walsh fielded most of them with practiced efficiency, revealing what could be revealed and deflecting what couldn't. Finally, Mia was asked the question she'd been both dreading and hoping for. "What happens now? What do you want people to take away from this?" She took a breath, chose her words carefully. "I want people to understand that the medical system depends on healthcare workers being able to advocate for their patients without fear of retaliation. What happened to me, being dismissed, threatened, physically removed for refusing an order I knew was wrong, that happens to nurses and other medical professionals every single day. Usually the stakes aren't life and death. Usually there's no international conspiracy involved, but the fundamental dynamic is the same. Authority figures who won't listen to frontline workers who see problems they're trained to recognize." She paused, feeling the weight of every camera focused on her face. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I did my job. I assessed my patient, I advocated for appropriate care, and when told to do something I knew was harmful, I refused. That should be normal. That should be celebrated, not punished. And if my story changes anything, I hope it's that the next nurse who sees something wrong feels empowered to speak up, knowing they'll be supported rather than destroyed." The press conference concluded with Walsh announcing that federal prosecutors would be seeking maximum sentences for all involved parties, that additional arrests were expected as the investigation continued, and that witness protection was being offered to anyone with information about Kozlov's network. As they filed out of the press room, Mia felt the adrenaline draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Morrison appeared at her elbow, guiding her toward a secure exit. "You did good in there. Really good. Did it work? Did we change the narrative? Look." Morrison held up her phone, showing social media feeds that were already shifting. Major news outlets were leading with Caldwell's arrest, not with Mia's supposed instability. Commentary was focusing on corruption and conspiracy, not on questioning her credibility. The tide was turning, slowly but visibly. They reached a secure conference room where Walsh was already coordinating with her team. She looked up as they entered, satisfaction evident on her face. "Caldwell's attorneys just called. He wants to testify. Full cooperation, complete disclosure of the network's operations, in exchange for life in prison rather than a death penalty charge." "And we're taking the deal?" Mia asked. "We're considering it. His information could help us dismantle the entire organization, not just arrests, but asset seizures, international warrants, the works." Walsh's expression was conflicted. "I know you want him to face maximum consequences. So do I. But if his testimony saves lives by preventing future attacks, then you make the deal." Mia surprised herself with how easily the words came. Justice isn't always about maximum punishment. Sometimes it's about preventing the next victim. Walsh studied her for a long moment. "You'd make a good prosecutor." "I'll stick with nursing, thanks. Though apparently I'm unemployed now." "Actually." Hawthorne entered the room carrying a folder. "The Secretary of Defense has authorized a rather unusual position. The military medical system needs someone to review suspicious patient deaths, to establish protocols for identifying compromised personnel, to train staff on recognizing patterns of manipulation and corruption. The position would be civilian, federal pay scale, full benefits, and you'd be working directly with military intelligence and FBI investigations. Mia stared at him. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a purpose. You've got instincts that saved lives and exposed corruption. We need those instincts applied systematically. Hawthorne set the folder on the table. No pressure, take time to think about it. But the offer stands. Before Mia could respond, Morrison's radio crackled with an update that made everyone in the room tense. All units, be advised. We have confirmed reports that Viktor Kozlov has fled Russia. Last known location was a private airfield outside Moscow. Current whereabouts unknown. He's running, Walsh said. The network's collapsing and he's abandoning ship. Or he's going underground to rebuild. The colonel's voice carried warning. Kozlov doesn't give up. He adapts. This isn't over. Morrison's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She read it, and her expression shifted to something Mia couldn't quite parse. Satisfaction mixed with concern. Hospital Board of Mercy Heights just announced they're requesting a federal investigation into their own administration. They're claiming they had no knowledge of Westfield's activities and want full transparency. They're trying to save themselves, Mia said, distancing from the corruption now that it's public. Let them. We've got bigger targets. Walsh pulled up a map on the conference room screen, showing locations across the United States marked with red pins. Each of these is a facility where we've identified suspicious deaths potentially linked to Kozlov's network. We need to investigate all of them, and we need people who know how to spot the patterns. People like you. Mia looked at the map, at the dozens of red pins representing potential murders, and felt something crystallize in her chest. She'd stumbled into this fight by accident, by simply refusing to abandon a patient who needed help. But now, seeing the scope of the problem, understanding how many people might still be in danger, walking away felt impossible. I'll do it, she said. The job, the investigations, whatever you need. Hawthorne nodded, something like respect flickering across his stern features. Good. You start Monday, but first you're taking 48 hours of actual rest. Doctor's orders. The secure facility where they'd relocated the colonel had quarters prepared for Mia, a small apartment that felt almost luxurious after days of crisis. She collapsed onto the bed without even removing her shoes, every muscle in her body suddenly remembering how exhausted it was. She woke to darkness and Morrison sitting in a chair by the window, silhouetted against the night sky. How long was I out? Mia's voice was rough with sleep. 16 hours. It's 2 a.m. Morrison didn't turn from the window. Couldn't sleep myself, so I've been maintaining watch. Old habits. Mia sat up, wincing at the various aches and pains that protested the movement. What are you watching for? Threats, patterns, anything that doesn't belong. Morrison finally looked at her. But honestly, I think we're actually safe for the first time since this started. Kozlov's network is in chaos. Caldwell's testimony is already leading to more arrests. The press coverage has shifted entirely. You're not the villain anymore. Feels strange, being on the other side of the narrative. Mia moved to the window, looking out at the Virginia countryside bathed in moonlight. What happens to all the people who believed the lies, who spent days convinced I was the problem? Some will adjust to the new information, some won't. People are remarkably resistant to admitting they were wrong. Morrison's voice held old cynicism. But the ones who matter, the ones who make decisions about prosecution and legislation and accountability, they have the truth now. That's what counts. A knock at the door brought both women alert, hands moving toward weapons that weren't there. But it was just Walsh, carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who'd been awake for days straight. Sorry to interrupt your rest, but you need to see this. She pulled up a news feed showing a live press conference from Moscow. Kozlov just released a statement. The man on screen was in his 60s, silver-haired and distinguished-looking, speaking in accented English with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. I want to address the accusations made by the American government. I am a businessman, nothing more. The charges against me are fabrications designed to cover up the United States' own illegal intelligence operations. This nurse they parade as a hero, she is CIA, trained to infiltrate and eliminate. The senator they arrested? A patriot who tried to expose government overreach. Everything you are being told is propaganda. Mia felt rage surge through her exhaustion. He's still lying. After everything we've exposed, he's still lying. Of course he is. Truth doesn't matter to people like Kozlov, only leverage and narrative control. Walsh's expression was grim. But he made a mistake. By going public, by putting his face and voice on record denying everything, he's made it personal. Before he was a shadowy figure most people had never heard of. Now he's the face of the conspiracy. When we bring him down, and we will bring him down, everyone will see it happen. The statement continued, Kozlov spinning an elaborate counter-narrative that painted himself as victim and the United States as aggressor. It was masterful propaganda designed to appeal to conspiracy theorists and anti-government sentiment. And Mia could already see it spreading across social media in real time. How do we fight that? She asked. We already are. Watch. Walsh switched feeds to show a different press conference, this one featuring 3 people Mia didn't recognize. These are nurses from other hospitals who came forward after your press conference. They're testifying about suspicious orders they received, about pressure to compromise patient care, about colleagues who exhibited the same patterns as Westfield. Your courage gave them courage. Sure. One nurse, a man in his 40s with tired eyes, was speaking directly to the camera. I was told I was paranoid when I questioned why a patient's medication orders didn't match their chart. I was written up for insubordination when I insisted on double-checking dosages. After seeing what Nurse Chen went through, I pulled the records. The attending physician who wrote those orders? Just arrested as part of Kozlov's network. My patient would have died from that medication error. I thought I was crazy for questioning it. Turns out I was right. More testimonies followed, a cascade of healthcare workers who'd seen things that troubled them but stayed quiet out of fear or doubt. Now they were speaking up, and the pattern was undeniable. Kozlov's network hadn't just infiltrated one hospital, it had spread like cancer through the medical system. This is what you started, Walsh said quietly. One nurse refusing to back down, and now dozens are finding their voices. Morrison's phone buzzed with an alert that made her straighten. Kozlov's location just pinged, private yacht in international waters off Cyprus. He thinks he's safe there. No extradition treaties, international jurisdiction questions. Then we make it not about extradition, Walsh said. We freeze his assets, sanction anyone who does business with him, make him radioactive to every government and criminal organization. He wants to fight a propaganda war? We'll hit him where it actually hurts, his money. Over the next 24 hours, Mia watched the machinery of federal law enforcement grind into action with devastating efficiency. Kozlov's bank accounts were frozen by Treasury Department order. His shell companies were exposed and sanctioned. His business partners were offered deals, cooperate or face prosecution as co-conspirators. The network that had seemed invincible days ago was collapsing under coordinated assault. Caldwell's testimony proved even more valuable than expected. He'd kept meticulous records as insurance against Kozlov betraying him, dates, amounts, operational details on every transaction. Combined with the physical evidence from the hospital assault and the testimony from other healthcare workers, the prosecution had built a case so airtight that defense attorneys were already discussing plea deals. Mia returned to Harbor City 48 hours after the press conference, Morrison and a security detail accompanying her. The city looked different somehow, or maybe she was different, seeing it through eyes that had witnessed too much violence and betrayal to ever be truly naive again. Mercy Heights Medical Center was cordoned off, federal investigators still processing the crime scene. Mia stood across the street, looking at the shattered windows and bullet-scarred walls, and felt a complicated mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. You saved a lot of lives here, Morrison said quietly. Not just the colonel. Everyone in that building when the assault started. You bought them time to evacuate by holding your position. The death toll could have been 3 times higher. 12 people still died. I can name them. Mia closed her eyes, saw their faces. Security guards she'd joked with, nurses she'd worked alongside, a visitor who'd been in the wrong place at the worst time. That matters. It does. And their deaths are on Kozlov and his network, not on you. Morrison's hand found her shoulder. You need to let yourself understand that. You didn't cause this. You exposed it. They drove to Mia's apartment, which had been secured and cleared by federal agents, but still felt violated somehow. Knowing strangers had been through her belongings, had cataloged her life looking for connections to conspiracies that didn't exist. She packed a bag, taking only what mattered, and left the rest. Where to now? Morrison asked. Walter Reed. The colonel's being transferred there for long-term recovery. I want to check on him before I take up that position Hawthorne offered. The colonel was in better condition than she'd expected, color back in his face, moving without quite so much pain, his monitors showing steady improvement. He smiled when Mia entered, genuine warmth cutting through the professional assessment she always made of patients. The nurse who saved my life. Pull up a chair. Mia sat, her medical eye automatically checking his IV lines and bandages. You're healing well. Another week and you'll be complaining about being discharged too early. Probably. His expression turned serious. I heard you took the job. Federal medical investigator. Seemed like the right move. I can't go back to regular nursing after all this. Can't pretend I don't know what I know. Mia looked at her hands, at the healing cuts and bruises that marked everything she'd survived. And maybe I can prevent someone else from going through what we went through. You'll be good at it. You've got the instincts and the courage. The colonel paused, choosing his words carefully. But you need to know what you're signing up for. This kind of work, hunting corruption, exposing conspiracies, it changes you, makes you see patterns everywhere, trust no one completely. It's a hard way to live. Harder than being hunted by international criminals? Mia's smile was wry. I think that ship has sailed. Might as well use what I learned. A knock at the door announced General Hawthorne, carrying an envelope that looked official and weighty. Nurse Chen, good timing. I have something for you. He handed her the envelope, which contained a letter on Department of Defense letterhead. Mia read it and felt tears prick her eyes despite herself. It was a formal commendation for civilian valor, signed by the Secretary of Defense himself, recognizing her actions in protecting a federal operative and exposing a conspiracy that threatened national security. But more than that, it was vindication, official, documented proof that she'd been right, that her actions had been heroic rather than unstable. This will be entered into your permanent record, Hawthorne said, along with a recommendation for the Defense Civilian Service Medal. No one will ever question your judgment or credibility again. Thank you, sir. Mia's voice was thick. This means more than you know. You earned it, multiple times over. Hawthorne's stern face softened marginally. Your first assignment in the new position starts next week, reviewing patient deaths at a military hospital in San Diego. Suspicious pattern of post-surgical complications in otherwise healthy patients. Might be nothing, might be another network operation. I'll find out. Mia felt purpose settling over her shoulders like armor. Whatever it is, I'll find out. She left the hospital as evening fell over Washington, Morrison walking her to a car that would take her to her new temporary housing. The security detail was being reduced now that the immediate threat had passed, though Morrison insisted on maintaining at least basic protection until Kozlov was captured. You think we'll catch him? Mia asked as they drove through streets busy with evening traffic. Eventually, people like Kozlov always make mistakes when they're running. They get desperate, reach out to old contacts, expose themselves. Morrison's voice carried certainty. And when we do catch him, you'll probably be called to testify at his trial. You ready for that? I've testified before a grand jury and survived a press conference. I think I can handle a trial. Mia looked out the window at the city passing by, at ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware of how close they'd come to having a terrorist network operating unopposed in their hospitals. Besides, I've got practice now, telling the truth even when people don't want to hear it. Morrison's phone buzzed with a message that made her smile, an actual, genuine smile that transformed her professional facade. Your press conference had an unexpected effect. 3 major hospitals just announced they're implementing new protocols for nursing advocacy. Staff can now request second opinions without fear of retaliation, and any termination for patient advocacy triggers automatic review. Really? Mia felt something warm expand in her chest. That's incredible. That's your legacy. You changed the system by refusing to accept how it was. Morrison's voice carried respect that went beyond professional courtesy. That's real power, Mia, not money or position or violence. Just one person standing up and saying, "This is wrong," loudly enough that others hear and follow. They pulled up to a modest apartment building in a quiet neighborhood, Mia's new home for however long this assignment lasted. Federal housing, secure but not ostentatious, close enough to Walter Reed and the Pentagon for easy commuting. "Get some rest," Morrison said as Mia climbed out. "Monday comes fast and San Diego won't investigate itself." Mia watched the car drive away, then turned to her new building. It wasn't home. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was a beginning. A chance to rebuild not just her reputation, but her entire purpose. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. She opened it and read with growing satisfaction. The hospital board at Mercy Heights had just announced wholesale resignations. Every administrator who'd been involved in the attempt to cover up Westfield's activities was stepping down pending investigation. The board chairman's statement acknowledged catastrophic failures in oversight and patient safety and promised complete transparency and accountability. Too little. Too late for the people who died. But maybe not too late to prevent future deaths. More alerts followed as Mia climbed the stairs to her apartment. Federal prosecutors were moving forward with charges against all 23 individuals indicted by the grand jury. Caldwell was cooperating fully, his testimony already leading to additional arrests in 3 states. And international pressure was mounting on countries that might harbor Kozlov. Cyprus had just announced they were cooperating with U.S. authorities to locate and detain him. The apartment was sparse but functional: furniture, basic kitchen supplies, a bed that looked infinitely appealing after days of crisis. Mia dropped her bag and went to the window, looking out at the city lights spreading to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Kozlov was running. Somewhere out there, other conspiracies were unfolding. Other patients were at risk. Other healthcare workers were seeing things that troubled them but staying silent. But not for long. Because now there was precedent. Now there was proof that speaking up could change things. That one person refusing to accept corruption could bring down entire networks. Mia's phone rang. An unknown number, but she answered anyway. "Hello? Nurse Chen?" An unfamiliar voice, female and hesitant. "I'm a respiratory therapist in Phoenix. I saw your press conference and I need to talk to someone about what's happening at my hospital. Orders that don't make sense, patients who get worse instead of better, and when I questioned it, I was written up for insubordination." Mia grabbed a pen and paper. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." As she listened to another healthcare worker finding courage to speak up, Mia felt the weight of her new purpose settling into place. This was the work now, not just investigation, but inspiration, showing others that resistance was possible and worth the risk. The truth was a weapon, and she'd learned how to wield it, and she was just getting started. The respiratory therapist's story spilled out in a rush. Suspicious medication orders, patients who deteriorated despite treatment, and a chief physician who dismissed every concern with the same condescending authority Mia had faced from Westfield. By the time the call ended 90 minutes later, Mia had filled 6 pages with notes and promised to forward everything to Walsh's team. She hung up and immediately dialed Morrison. "We've got another one. Phoenix, same pattern, compromised physician, suspicious deaths, staff too intimidated to report. Send me everything you have. I'll get a team on it tonight." Morrison's voice carried grim satisfaction. "That's 3 new leads since your press conference. The dam's breaking." Over the next week, Mia worked 16-hour days from her apartment, coordinating with federal investigators while preparing for her first official assignment in San Diego. Each call brought new information, new patterns, new confirmation that Kozlov's network had been far more extensive than anyone had realized. Hospital workers across the country were finally finding their voices, and the stories they told painted a picture of systematic corruption that made Mia's case look almost small by comparison. Walsh appeared at her door on Friday evening, unannounced, and carrying takeout that smelled like salvation. "You need to eat something other than coffee and determination." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the food better than anything Mia had tasted in days. Finally, Walsh set down her fork and pulled out her tablet. Kozlov's yacht was boarded by Cypriot authorities this morning. He wasn't on it. Left 3 days ago on a private jet, destination unknown. Walsh's expression was frustrated. He's better at running than we anticipated. But he is running, not operating, not rebuilding, running. Mia felt a surge of fierce satisfaction. That's something. It is. And while he runs, we're dismantling everything he built. The Phoenix hospital you flagged? FB. I raided it this morning. Found enough evidence to arrest the chief of surgery and 2 attending physicians. They're already offering to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. Walsh's smile was sharp. Your instincts were right again. Monday morning, Mia flew to San Diego with Morrison and a small team of investigators. The military hospital sat on a sprawling base overlooking the Pacific, all clean lines and military efficiency. The commanding officer, a stern-faced colonel named Harper, met them in his office with the kind of controlled tension that suggested he already knew this visit would end badly for someone. 6 post-surgical deaths in the last 4 months, Harper said without preamble, pulling up patient files on his computer. All young, healthy service members, all different procedures, appendectomy, hernia repair, knee reconstruction. No obvious common factors, except they all died within 72 hours of surgery. Mia studied the files with the focused intensity she'd developed over years of emergency nursing. Who were their surgeons? Different doctors for each case. That's what made us think it might be random bad luck rather than a pattern. Harper's jaw tightened. But 6 deaths in 4 months, when our average is maybe 1 per year? Statistical analysis says that's not chance. It's not. Mia was already seeing the pattern, the thing everyone else had missed because they were looking at doctors instead of the whole system. Show me their anesthesia records. Harper pulled up the files, and Mia felt ice flood her veins. Same anesthesiologist for all 6 cases, Dr. Raymond Torres. Morrison was already moving, radio in hand. Where's Torres now? Surgery 2. He's got a procedure starting in 20 minutes. Routine gallbladder removal. Harper's face had gone pale. You think he's going to cancel it? Now. And get me Torres's personnel file, financial records, everything. Mia's mind was racing ahead, seeing how it would play out. Different surgeons meant no single doctor would notice the pattern. Young, healthy patients meant their deaths would be shocking enough to investigate, but not suspicious. Tragic accidents rather than murder. And an anesthesiologist had access to every patient, every procedure, perfect opportunity to administer something that would cause delayed complications. The personnel file revealed what Mia had already guessed. Torres had gambling debts, financial problems, and a brother-in-law with ties to a shell company later identified as part of Kozlov's network. He'd been recruited the same way Westfield had, money for information, then pressured into escalating involvement until he was killing patients on command. They found him in the doctor's lounge, sipping coffee and reviewing charts for his scheduled procedure. Morrison entered with 2 armed MPS, their presence making Torres's head snap up in alarm. Dr. Torres, I'm Captain Morrison, U.S. Army. I need you to come with us. Torres ran, actually stood up and bolted for the door like he had somewhere to go in a locked military facility surrounded by armed personnel. The MPs tackled him before he made it 5 steps, cuffing his hands while he screamed about lawyers and false accusations and government persecution. Mia stepped into his line of sight, her badge identifying her as a federal medical investigator. 6 soldiers are dead because you were paid to kill them. We have your financial records. We have communications between you and Kozlov's operatives. We have everything. Torres's face crumpled. I didn't want to. They threatened my family, said if I didn't cooperate, my daughter would have an accident. So you murdered 6 people to protect your family? Mia's voice was ice. Those soldiers had families too. Parents, spouses, children. You killed them to save yourself. The MPS dragged Torres away, still protesting, still making excuses. Harper stood in the doorway, looking like he'd aged a decade in the last hour. How many more are there? How many other facilities has Kozlov compromised? We're finding out. Mia pulled up the list Walsh had compiled. 43 suspicious clusters of deaths across military and civilian hospitals in 17 states. Every facility with statistical anomalies is being investigated. Every healthcare worker who's come forward is being protected. We're cleaning house. The San Diego case broke national news that evening. Military anesthesiologist arrested for serial murder. part of the same network exposed by Nurse Mia Chen's initial refusal to abandon her patient. The media coverage was extensive and entirely different from what Mia had endured weeks earlier. Now she was the investigator, the expert, the person who'd started a cascade of accountability. Colonel Harper held a press conference praising her work. The Secretary of Defense issued a statement about zero tolerance for corruption in military medical facilities, and hospital administrators across the country suddenly discovered enthusiasm for transparency and oversight. Mia watched the coverage from her hotel room, Morrison beside her doing the same. It feels strange, being on this side of it. You earned this. Morrison's voice was firm. You stood up when standing up meant losing everything. Now you're getting recognition for it. That's not strange. That's justice. Walsh called with an update that made Mia sit up straight. Kozlov surfaced. He's in Moscow, seeking asylum. Russia's claiming he's being politically persecuted by the U.S. government. Can we extradite him? Not from Russia, but we don't need to. Walsh's satisfaction was audible. His network is destroyed. His assets are frozen. His operatives are testifying against him. He's a pariah, even among criminals now. Too hot to touch, too exposed to be useful. He'll spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, knowing we're one diplomatic shift away from grabbing him. It wasn't perfect justice. Mia had wanted to see Kozlov in a courtroom, facing the families of his victims, hearing guilty verdicts read out for every life he'd destroyed. But watching him reduced to a fugitive hiding behind diplomatic immunity, that held its own satisfaction. The trials began in October, 5 months after that night in Mercy Heights Emergency Department. Mia testified at each one, her credibility now unassailable, her testimony backed by mountains of evidence. Caldwell went first, facing 18 federal charges in a trial that lasted 6 weeks. His defense attempted to paint him as a victim of coercion, claimed he'd been trapped by circumstances beyond his control. The prosecution showed bank records detailing $15 million in payments over 6 years, showed communications where Caldwell had actively suggested targets, had sold classified information, had coordinated attacks on federal witnesses, showed his enthusiastic participation in a conspiracy that had resulted in at least 43 documented deaths. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Caldwell was sentenced to life without possibility of parole in a supermax facility where his remaining years would be measured in isolation and regret. The hospital administrators from Mercy Heights faced trials that were almost anticlimactic by comparison. Their corruption was financial rather than murderous, accepting bribes to look the other way while Westfield operated. They received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years, their careers destroyed, their reputations permanently tarnished. Dr. Torres's trial was the hardest for Mia. She had to testify about the 6 soldiers he'd killed, had to describe the medical evidence showing how he'd administered drugs that would cause delayed cardiac arrests or surgical complications, had to watch him weep and claim he was a victim while family members of his victims sat in the courtroom demanding justice. The defense tried to use his coercion claims as mitigation. The prosecution showed evidence that Torres had been paid over $2 million, that he'd purchased a vacation home and luxury vehicles with blood money, that he'd killed 6 people and was preparing to kill a 7th when arrested. Guilty on all counts. Sentenced to death by lethal injection, with the option of life without parole if he continued to cooperate with ongoing investigations. By the time the last trial concluded in March, Mia had testified in 14 separate cases, her schedule a blur of courtrooms and depositions and investigative fieldwork. She'd identified corruption in 9 additional hospitals, prevented at least 12 murders in progress by flagging suspicious patterns before they could be completed, and trained over 200 military medical personnel on recognizing signs of compromise and coercion. The colonel, Daniel Mercer, she'd learned his first name only after 3 months of knowing him, had recovered enough to return to limited duty. They met for coffee on a rare free afternoon, sitting in a cafe near Walter Reed where other patrons had no idea they were sharing space with people who'd survived things most couldn't imagine. "You look tired," he said without preamble. "I am tired. I've testified in 14 trials, investigated 23 hospitals, and spent more nights in hotel rooms than in my own apartment." Mia sipped her coffee, felt the caffeine hit her system like a drug. "But I'm also doing work that matters, saving lives by exposing the people trying to take them." That's good work. Important work. Daniel's voice carried understanding. But it's also the kind of work that burns people out if they're not careful. I've seen it happen to the best operatives. They give everything to the mission until there's nothing left of themselves. What are you saying? I'm saying make sure you're taking care of yourself too. Finding balance. Remembering why you got into nursing in the first place. He met her eyes with the kind of directness that came from surviving combat together. You saved my life by being someone who cared about patients as people, not just as cases. Don't lose that person in the work of being an investigator. The words hit harder than Mia expected. She'd been running full speed for 6 months, chasing corruption and testifying in trials and preventing murders, barely stopping to process any of it. When was the last time she'd called her family? When had she last done something just because it brought her joy? I don't know how to do both, she admitted. How to be the investigator and the nurse. They feel like different people. Then figure out how to integrate them. You're not just one thing, Mia. You're allowed to be complicated. Daniel's smile was warm despite his scarred face. And you're allowed to rest occasionally. The corruption will still be there tomorrow. Morrison called that evening with news that made Mia's heart leap. Kozlov's dead, heart attack in his Moscow apartment. Russian authorities are claiming natural causes, but our intelligence suggests it was anything but natural. Someone killed him? Mia felt conflicted emotions warring in her chest, relief that he was gone, frustration that it hadn't been through legitimate justice. Someone from his own organization, probably. When you destroy a criminal network, the survivors scramble for power. Kozlov became a liability, too exposed, too hot, no longer useful. Morrison's voice carried grim satisfaction. He died alone and afraid, knowing everything he built had collapsed. That's its own kind of justice. It should have felt like closure. The man responsible for so much death and corruption was gone, unable to hurt anyone else. But Mia found herself thinking about all the people who'd never get to confront him, never get to see him held accountable in a courtroom. Walsh called 30 minutes later. I know Morrison already told you. I want to make sure you understand what this means. The investigation continues. Just because Kozlov's dead doesn't mean his network is completely dismantled. We're still finding operatives, still uncovering corruption. Your work is more important than ever. I understand. And Mia did understand, felt the weight of it settling over her shoulders. This wasn't about one man anymore. It was about a system that had been compromised and needed to be cleaned, patient by patient, hospital by hospital, until healthcare workers could do their jobs without fear of retaliation or corruption. The 1-year anniversary of that night in Mercy Heights Emergency Department arrived with surprising speed. The hospital had been rebuilt, the security failures addressed, the administration completely overhauled. They'd invited Mia to a memorial service for the 12 people who'd died in the assault. And despite her initial reluctance, she found herself on a plane back to Harbor City. The memorial was held on the hospital lawn where the helicopters had landed that night. Families of the victims were there, along with surviving staff members and community leaders. Mia stood in the back, trying to be invisible, but she was recognized almost immediately. A woman approached her, late 50s, with eyes that held profound grief. You're Nurse Chen. You're the reason my husband died. Mia's breath caught. I'm so sorry for your loss. I never wanted... No, you misunderstand. The woman's voice cracked. My husband was Jerry Kowalski, one of the security guards. He called me that night, after you were dragged away, after the Pentagon called. He said you'd been right all along, that he wished he'd stood with you instead of following orders. Tears streamed down her face. He died protecting patients during the evacuation, and he told his partner to tell me, if anything happened, that he was proud to die doing the right thing. Proud that people like you reminded him what the right thing was. Mia felt her own tears starting, months of suppressed emotion threatening to break through her professional control. He was a good man. He was just following orders. Bad orders. Following bad orders from bad people who cared more about authority than truth. The woman gripped Mia's hands. You didn't follow bad orders. You stood up and said no. Jerry wished he'd had your courage. I wish he'd had your courage. Maybe if he had, he'd still be alive. But at least he died knowing what you'd been fighting for mattered. The memorial service was beautiful and heartbreaking. Names read aloud, lives remembered, promises made that their deaths would not be meaningless. The hospital's new director, a woman who'd built her career on patient advocacy, announced new policies protecting healthcare workers who reported safety concerns or ethical violations. "We failed our staff," she said, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "We created a culture where authority was valued over integrity, where questioning orders was punished rather than encouraged. 12 people died because we forgot that healthcare is built on trust, between patients and providers, between staff and administration. That trust was betrayed. We're committed to ensuring it's never betrayed again." Mia was asked to speak, thrust into the spotlight despite her protests. She stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of faces, some angry, some grieving, some simply waiting to hear what the nurse who'd started all this had to say. "I didn't want to be a hero," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I just wanted to do my job, take care of my patient, make sure someone who needed help got the help they needed. I didn't set out to expose a conspiracy or bring down a criminal network. I just refused to abandon someone who couldn't advocate for themselves." She paused, gathering her thoughts. The people we're remembering today died because corruption had infected a system we're supposed to trust with our lives. They died because people in positions of authority valued money and power more than human lives. They died because someone had to stand up and say, "This is wrong," and standing up meant becoming a target. Her voice grew stronger. "But here's what I've learned in the years since that night. Standing up matters. Speaking truth matters. Refusing to accept corruption as inevitable matters. Every healthcare worker who's come forward since then, every investigation that's uncovered wrongdoing, every life that's been saved because someone questioned suspicious orders, that all started here, with 12 people dying and one nurse refusing to let their deaths be meaningless." She looked directly at Jerry Kowalski's widow. "Your loved ones died protecting patients and confronting evil. That's the most honorable death anyone could ask for. And we honor them by making sure the system they died trying to protect actually becomes worthy of that sacrifice." The applause that followed felt almost inappropriate. How could you applaud at a memorial? But it wasn't celebration, Mia realized. It was affirmation. Agreement that the deaths mattered, that the fight had been worth it, that truth had value even when defending it cost lives. After the ceremony, Mia was surrounded by people wanting to thank her, to share their own stories of standing up against authority or being punished for questioning orders. A young nurse pulled her aside with tears streaming down her face. "I was there that night. I was one of the nurses who looked away when they dragged you out. I've hated myself for it every single day since." The nurse's voice shook. "I should have said something, should have stood with you." "You're saying something now." Mia squeezed her hand. "You're still here, still doing the work. That matters too." Morrison appeared through the crowd, her presence professional but protective. "We need to go. Your flight to D.C. leaves in 2 hours, and you've got that Senate hearing tomorrow." The Senate hearing? Mia had almost forgotten in the emotion of the memorial. The Armed Services Committee was holding hearings on medical facility security and corruption, and she'd been called to testify about systemic failures and recommended reforms. The hearing room was packed with senators, staffers, media, and spectators interested in the woman who'd exposed a conspiracy that had reached the Senate itself. Caldwell's empty seat was a silent reminder of how deep the corruption had run. Mia was sworn in and gave testimony that was equal parts technical analysis and moral clarity. She explained how Kozlov's network had exploited hierarchical medical structures, how they'd relied on healthcare workers being too intimidated to question authority, how preventing future corruption required cultural change as much as policy reform. Senator Patricia Hammond, no relation to the hospital director, leaned forward during the question period. "Nurse Chen, some have criticized your actions as insubordinate. They argue that medical facilities require clear hierarchies and that allowing nurses to override physician orders creates chaos. How do you respond?" Mia met her eyes directly. "I respond that blind obedience to authority has no place in healthcare. Every medical professional takes an oath to do no harm. When following orders means harming patients, we have a moral and professional obligation to refuse. Clear hierarchies are important for efficiency, but they cannot supersede patient safety. And any system that punishes healthcare workers for advocating for their patients is a system that will inevitably be exploited by people like Kozlov. Another senator asked about preventing future infiltration. Mia laid out recommendations that had been refined through months of investigation: mandatory ethics training, protected reporting systems, independent oversight of suspicious deaths, financial transparency for medical staff, and most importantly, cultural change that valued questioning authority when patient safety was at risk. The best defense against corruption, she concluded, is empowering frontline healthcare workers to trust their instincts and speak up without fear of retaliation. Every nurse, every technician, every therapist who sees something wrong needs to know they'll be protected when they report it. That's how we prevent the next Kozlov from succeeding. The senators voted unanimously to implement her recommendations across all federal medical facilities. It was the kind of policy change that would have seemed impossible a year ago, but the evidence was too overwhelming, the public pressure too intense. 12 people had died. Dozens more had been murdered across the country. The cost of inaction was simply too high. After the hearing, Mia was approached by a woman in an expensive suit who introduced herself as Helen Torres. No relation to the San Diego anesthesiologist, she clarified with bitter humor. I'm starting a nonprofit, Patient Advocacy and Healthcare Worker Protection. Legal support for medical professionals who report corruption, funding for independent investigations, public awareness campaigns. Helen's eyes were intense with purpose. I want you on the board of directors. Your name carries weight now. Your voice could help protect thousands of healthcare workers who might otherwise stay silent. Mia considered, feeling the pull of new responsibilities and new possibilities. I'm already working full-time as a federal investigator. I know. This would be advisory, board meetings quarterly, occasional public appearances, lending your credibility to the mission. Helen pulled out a folder thick with organizational documents. We've already secured funding from medical associations and concerned citizens. We're calling it the Mercy Alliance, named for the hospital where this all started. We want to honor the people who died by making sure their deaths lead to lasting change. The Mercy Alliance. Mia liked the sound of it. Transformation of tragedy into purpose, pain into protection. I'm in. Tell me what you need. Over the following months, Mia's life found a new rhythm. Federal investigator by day, tracking corruption and saving lives through systematic analysis. Board member and advocate by evening, working to change the culture that had allowed corruption to flourish. It was exhausting and fulfilling in equal measure, the kind of work that demanded everything but gave back meaning. Daniel Mercer returned to field operations, though in a supervisory role now given his injuries. They stayed in touch, occasional coffee meetings where they traded stories about bureaucratic frustrations and victories hard won. He'd started teaching at the intelligence training facility, passing along lessons learned through nearly dying in a hospital bed. You changed how we think about threat assessment, he told her during one of their meetings. Used to be we'd focus on obvious dangers, armed assaults, bombs, conventional attacks. Now we train operatives to recognize medical manipulation as a threat vector. You probably saved dozens of lives just by making people aware this kind of corruption exists. Morrison eventually left active duty to work private security, but maintained her role protecting Mia during high-profile appearances. Someone has to keep you alive, she said with characteristic dry humor. You've made a lot of enemies by exposing their operations. Kozlov might be dead, but his survivors aren't happy about what you did to their network. The threats were real but manageable. Mia traveled with security, varied her routines, stayed aware of her surroundings. It was a small price to pay for the work she was doing, the lives being saved, the corruption being exposed, the healthcare workers finding courage to speak up because she'd shown them it was possible. 2 years after that night in Mercy Heights, Mia received an unexpected phone call. The hospital's new director, the one who'd spoken at the memorial, had a proposal. We want to name our new patient advocacy center after you, the Mia Chen Center for Healthcare Integrity. It would provide legal support for medical staff who report safety concerns, fund independent investigations of suspicious deaths, and train healthcare workers on recognizing signs of corruption. The director's voice carried hope and determination. We want to make sure what happened here never happens anywhere else. And we want to honor the nurse who showed us what integrity looks like. Mia stood in her apartment looking out at Washington, D.C., at the monuments to people who'd stood up against impossible odds and changed the world. She thought about Jerry Kowalski dying to protect patients, about the 12 victims whose names she could recite from memory, about the 6 soldiers killed in San Diego and the dozens of others murdered across the country. Yes, she said, but only if we also name it after the people who died. They're the ones who paid the ultimate price. They deserve to be remembered. The Mia Chen Center for Healthcare Integrity opened 6 months later in a ceremony attended by hundreds. Families of the victims were there, along with healthcare workers from across the country who'd found their voices through Mia's example. The center's mission statement was carved into stone at the entrance. In memory of those who died exposing corruption, in honor of those who fight to prevent it, and in service to patients who deserve healthcare they can trust. Mia gave a speech that was shorter and more emotional than any testimony she'd delivered in court. This center exists because 12 people died, and 1 nurse refused to let their deaths be meaningless. But it continues to exist because of all of you, every healthcare worker who's ever questioned a suspicious order, every patient who's demanded accountability, every family member who's insisted on truth. We're all part of this fight, and together we're changing a system that desperately needed changing. She looked out at the crowd and saw faces she recognized, nurses who'd testified in trials, investigators who'd helped expose corruption, administrators who'd chosen integrity over political expediency. Saw Daniel Mercer in his dress uniform, Morrison in civilian clothes but with that same protective vigilance, Walsh with her FBI credentials and hard-won respect. I'm not special, Mia continued. I'm not uniquely brave or brilliant. I'm just a nurse who refused to abandon a patient who needed help. And if that simple act of doing my job could expose an international conspiracy and lead to all of this, she gestured at the center, at the crowd, at the monument to fallen heroes, then imagine what's possible when all of us decide to stand up, when every single healthcare worker trusts their instincts and speaks their truth. That's how we change the world. Not through grand gestures, but through ordinary people doing the right thing even when the right thing is hard. The applause was thunderous, but what stuck with Mia was what came after. One by one, people approached her with stories of their own small acts of courage. A pharmacist who'd questioned a suspicious prescription and prevented a murder. A lab technician who'd noticed pattern in false test results and exposed a fraud scheme. A physician who'd stood up to a hospital board trying to cover up negligent deaths. Each story was different, but they all shared the same core truth. One person standing up could make a difference, could save lives, could change systems, could transform tragedy into purpose. As the sun set on the ceremony, Mia found herself alone for a moment on a bench overlooking the center's memorial garden. 12 trees had been planted, 1 for each victim of the Mercy Heights assault. Their leaves rustled in the evening breeze, a sound like whispered conversations. Morrison appeared beside her, settling onto the bench without asking permission. You did good work today. Good work every day, really. We did good work. All of us. Mia leaned back, feeling exhaustion and satisfaction in equal measure. I couldn't have done any of this alone. No one does anything important alone. That's the whole point. Morrison was quiet for a moment, then added, You know what the best part is? 3 years ago, hospitals were firing nurses for questioning doctors. Now they're training staff to speak up. That's cultural change. That's real impact. Mia thought about the respiratory therapist who'd called her that first night, about the hundreds of healthcare workers who'd found courage to report what they were seeing. Thought about policies changed, lives saved, corruption exposed. Thought about justice served and truth vindicated. It was worth it, she said quietly. Everything we went through, everyone we lost, it was worth it because it led to this. Her phone buzzed with a message from Walsh. Another suspicious cluster of deaths had been flagged, this time at a hospital in Seattle. Preliminary investigation suggested possible compromise of the surgical team. They needed Mia's expertise to determine if it was corruption or coincidence. Morrison saw her expression change. Work calling? Always. Mia stood, feeling purpose settle over her like armor. Seattle Hospital needs investigation. Suspicious pattern of post-surgical deaths. When do you leave? Tomorrow morning, first flight out. Mia looked back at the center, at the memorial garden, at the physical manifestation of everything they'd fought for. But tonight, I'm staying right here, remembering why this matters, honoring the people who made it possible. They sat together as darkness fell and lights came on in the center's windows. Through the glass, Mia could see people still gathered, healthcare workers sharing stories, families finding community and shared loss, advocates planning next steps in the ongoing fight against corruption. This was her legacy. Not the trials, or the testimony, or the headlines, but this, a place where truth was valued over authority, where speaking up was protected rather than punished, where one person's refusal to abandon a patient had transformed into a movement. Daniel Mercer found them as the last guests were leaving. He moved easier now, the physical therapy and time-healing wounds that had nearly killed him. The center looks good, feels right. It does. Mia stood to face him properly. You know, if you hadn't tried to communicate that night, if I hadn't seen those scars and recognized something was wrong, none of this happens. We both played our parts. Difference is, I was trained to survive hostile situations. You were just a nurse doing her job. His smile was warm despite the scars. Just a nurse who changed everything. Stop saying just a nurse. Mia's voice was firm but amused. There's nothing just about nursing. Never has been. Fair point. Daniel extended his hand. Thank you, Nurse Chen, for saving my life, for exposing the conspiracy, for showing everyone what courage looks like. Mia shook his hand, felt the strength in his grip and the respect in his eyes. Thank you for surviving, for testifying, for making sure the truth came out. Walsh appeared with Morrison in tow, both women looking tired but satisfied. Final numbers just came in from the Justice Department. 73 arrests directly connected to the original Mercy Heights investigation. 146 more from subsequent investigations you've led. Estimated 300 lives saved by identifying and stopping compromised medical personnel before they could kill again. The numbers were staggering. 300 lives. 300 people who would have died if Mia had followed orders that night, if she'd transferred the colonel to shelter observation, if she'd accepted Westfield's authority over her own assessment. 300 families who still have their loved ones, Morrison added quietly. 300 futures that still exist because you refuse to back down. Mia felt tears threatening again, the weight of it all suddenly overwhelming. She'd spent 2 years focused on the work, the investigations, the trials, the policy changes. She hadn't let herself truly process the magnitude of what had been accomplished. I need a minute, she managed, walking toward the memorial garden before the tears could fall in front of everyone. Morrison followed anyway, because of course she did. Stood beside Mia as she cried in the darkness, offering silent support that meant more than any words could have. It's okay to feel this, Morrison said eventually. The weight of lives saved and lives lost. The responsibility of knowing your choices mattered this much. It's okay to be overwhelmed by it. I keep thinking about all the what-ifs. Mia's voice was thick with tears. What if I'd listened to Westfield? What if I'd let security drag me away? What if I'd been too scared to testify? Then hundreds of people would be dead, and a criminal network would still be operating. But you didn't listen, you didn't back down, and you weren't too scared. Morrison's hand found Mia's shoulder. You made the hard choices. You paid the price for doing the right thing. And you saved lives that can't be counted because we'll never know all the future victims who now won't exist. They stood in the garden as night settled fully around them, the 12 memorial trees standing sentinel over ground that represented both tragedy and transformation. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, ambulances rushing toward emergencies, carrying patients who would be treated by healthcare workers trained to question authority when patient safety demanded it. The system was changing, slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably changing, and it was changing because one nurse had refused to abandon her patient. Mia's phone buzzed again, a message from the respiratory therapist in Phoenix, thanking her for the investigation that had saved careers and lives. Another message from a family whose father had survived because a suspicious medication order had been questioned instead of blindly followed. Another from a nursing student who'd written a thesis on healthcare advocacy inspired by Mia's testimony. The impact rippled outward in ways she'd never fully know. Every healthcare worker who found courage to speak up, Every patient who survived because someone questioned a suspicious order, every life saved because the culture had shifted, all of it traced back to that moment in Mercy Heights. When a nurse had looked at a patient everyone else wanted to ignore and said, "No, this is wrong." Walsh appeared in the garden entrance. "Sorry to interrupt, but you should see this." She held up her tablet showing a live news feed. The anchor was reporting on a major healthcare reform bill being debated in Congress, legislation that would mandate protected reporting systems in all hospitals, establish independent oversight of suspicious deaths, and criminalize retaliation against medical staff who reported safety concerns. "They're calling it the Mercy Heights Act," Walsh said. "Should pass with bipartisan support. When it does, every hospital in America will be legally required to protect healthcare workers who speak up. Your testimony made this possible." Mia watched the news coverage, saw her own face appear on screen during a montage of the journey from that night 2 years ago to this moment of legislative victory. Saw clips from her Senate testimony, from the press conference, from the memorial service. Saw her transformation from dismissed nurse to federal investigator to catalyst for systemic change. "This is what justice looks like," she said quietly. "Not just punishing the guilty, but changing the system that enabled them, making sure it doesn't happen again." The group gathered in the center's conference room for an impromptu celebration. Someone found champagne, someone else ordered pizza, and for a few hours they were just people who'd survived impossible things together, laughing and sharing stories and allowing themselves to feel victorious. Daniel raised his glass in a toast. "To Nurse Mia Chen, who saved my life and changed the world. To courage, integrity, and refusing to accept corruption as inevitable. To the 12 who died at Mercy Heights," Walsh added. "And to the hundreds whose lives were saved because their deaths were not in vain. To speaking truth even when truth is dangerous," Morrison said. "And to standing up even when standing up costs everything." Mia raised her own glass, looking around at the people who'd become family through trauma and triumph. "To all of us. Because none of this was individual heroism, it was collective courage. Every person who testified, who investigated, who refused to stay silent. Every healthcare worker who found their voice because we showed them it was possible. That's what changed everything." They drank and ate and shared memories until late into the night. Eventually, people drifted away. Daniel back to his training duties, Walsh to her next investigation, others to lives and obligations that couldn't be postponed indefinitely. Morrison walked Mia out to her car as dawn was breaking over Washington. The city was waking up to a world slightly better than it had been the day before. Slightly safer because good people had refused to accept evil as normal. "You heading home?" Morrison asked. "For a few hours, then airport. Seattle won't investigate itself." Mia pulled out her phone, looked at the case file Walsh had sent. Pattern looked similar to San Diego. Different procedures, same anesthesiologist. "If I'm right, we might stop another killer before they claim more victims." "You're always right about these things. It's actually kind of annoying." Morrison's smile took the edge off her words. "Be careful in Seattle. Just because Kozlov's dead doesn't mean his network is completely dismantled." "I will. And Morrison?" Mia met her eyes. "Thank you. For everything. For protecting me, for believing in me, for standing beside me when the whole world thought I was crazy." "You were never crazy. You were right. And that terrified people in power." Morrison pulled her into a brief, fierce hug. "Now go save some more lives. It's what you do." Mia drove through empty D.C. streets as sunrise painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. She thought about where she'd been 2 years ago, a trauma nurse on a night shift, unknown and unremarkable, just trying to do her job well. Thought about who she was now, federal investigator, board member, advocate, the woman who'd exposed an international conspiracy by refusing to abandon one patient. The transformation was dizzying when she let herself think about it. But at the core, she was still the same person. Still a nurse who believed patients deserved advocacy, who trusted her instincts, who refused to let authority override what she knew was right. Her phone rang as she pulled into her apartment complex. Unknown number, but she answered anyway. "Nurse Chen? This is Dr. Sarah Martinez from Seattle General. I heard you're coming to investigate our surgical deaths, and I need to tell you something before you arrive. I tried to report my concerns weeks ago, but I was told I was being paranoid. that I was seeing patterns that didn't exist. They threatened to fire me if I kept making accusations without proof. Mia felt something fierce and familiar ignite in her chest, the same protective fury that had made her stand between the colonel and security guards, that had driven her to testify when testifying meant becoming a target. Dr. Martinez, I'm going to need you to document everything you've observed, every suspicious death, every unusual order, every time you were dismissed or threatened. Can you do that? Yes, I've been keeping notes, just in case. I didn't want to be like... Her voice caught. I didn't want to be like the doctors who stayed silent at Mercy Heights. I saw what happened there. I saw what it cost. I don't want that on my conscience. Then you're already braver than you know. Hold tight. I'll be there by noon, and we're going to figure out what's happening in your hospital, together. She hung up and sat in her car watching the sunrise, feeling the weight of responsibility and the lightness of purpose in equal measure. Another hospital, another investigation, another chance to save lives and expose corruption. This was her life now. This was who she'd become, not despite that night in Mercy Heights, but because of it. A nurse who'd refused to abandon her patient had discovered she couldn't abandon any patient, couldn't ignore any corruption, couldn't stay silent when silence meant death. It was exhausting work, dangerous work, work that demanded everything and offered no guarantees of success or safety. It was also the most important work she'd ever done. Mia Chen gathered her files, checked her equipment, and prepared for another fight. Because somewhere in Seattle, a healthcare worker was seeing things that didn't add up, and their concerns were being dismissed by people who valued authority over truth. Not anymore. Not while Mia was alive to speak up. The sun broke fully over the horizon, light flooding the world with promise and possibility. Mia smiled, feeling certain of her purpose for the first time in her life. She'd been called paranoid, unstable, insubordinate. She'd been dismissed, threatened, and nearly killed. She'd testified in courts, faced down senators, and changed federal policy. And she'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Because this was what nursing meant. This was what advocacy looked like. This was what happened when one person refused to accept that things couldn't change. She started her car and drove toward the airport, toward Seattle, toward the next investigation and the next fight and the next chance to prove that truth mattered more than authority. The world was still full of corruption and cruelty and people who valued power over human life, but it was also full of healthcare workers finding their courage, of patients getting the advocacy they deserved, of systems slowly transforming because good people refused to stay silent. Mia Chen had learned something important in the 2 years since she'd refused to transfer a patient everyone else wanted gone. One person standing up couldn't solve everything, but one person standing up could start everything. And sometimes that was enough.